All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the South Burlington City Council meeting for October 21st, 2024. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, led by, does somebody want to volunteer who hasn't done it in a while? Okay, well, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Going on to item number 2, which is instructions on exiting the building in case of emergency and review of technology options. Jesse Baker, City Manager.
So for those in the room, thank you for joining us. If there's an emergency, you can go out the rear of the auditorium on the left or right, and then turn left or right to get outside. For those participating remotely, thank you for joining us as well. If you'd like to speak during any item on the agenda, you can turn your camera on and the chair will call on you, or you can put in the chat that you would like to speak, and I will ask the chair to call on you. Other than that, we are not monitoring the chat for content.
Thank you. And item 3, which is agenda review. Does the council have any additions, deletions, or changes in order of the agenda items tonight? Do we have one executive session change?
Yes, so I believe you were going to take off the warrant executive session number 13, discussing probable civil litigation, and move that to your next meeting. And I believe you have one you want to add as well.
Right. Do we need wording for that second motion? Is that this one here? No, this is the motion.
So it would be this.
Okay. Oh, so we're going to add replace item 13 with another executive session titled Evaluation of Public Officer or Employee, and that would be the city councilors and the city manager. Any other changes, folks? Okay. Thank you. Moving on to item 4, which is comments and questions from the public not related to the agenda in front of us tonight. Are there any? I see somebody's camera is on. Mr. Doyle.
Yeah, Brian Doyle, City Center. This is on your consent agenda. There is something being signed about right-of-way acquisition. And I want to point out in the blueprints provided that they have still not taken all of the sidewalk back away from the road by Kinney's. I think that is still probably a right-of-way issue to be resolved, but V-Trans has been recommending for over 20 years to not build sidewalks curbside, and it is especially important not to build curbside when we have fast-moving traffic, many lanes of traffic, or high crash areas, which this is. When Kinney's was put in, I think it was 2015, the V-Trans guidance wasn't followed with those sidewalks, and we ended up with this very problematic crossing. And I know that crossing itself falls outside of the scope, but the approach to that crossing is within this scope, and it really should be dealt with to give at least 6 feet, just for the sake of having tree plantings, the way the state of Vermont recommends the distance for tree plantings between the sidewalk and the road, but also because you have 35 to 36 feet of street that need to be plowed and have that snow be removed off of the road. And having the sidewalk abut does not allow for snow storage space. So I hope that the city will keep working on that before that opportunity slips by us again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Is anybody else online? Is there somebody that wants to make a comment about something that's not on the agenda tonight? Nobody has their camera turned on. Anybody in the audience tonight? Okay, fine. We'll move on to number 5, which is Councilors Announcements and Reports on Committee Assignments and the City Manager's Report. Who would like to start tonight? I could start. You want me to start? I could go last, too. Mike, why don't we go this way and wrap our way around, starting with you.
All right. Went to the Bike and Ped meeting this past Wednesday, where they are focused on developing the work plan for this November. They had as a guidance the strategic plans that we sort of adopted at the retreat. They noticed that the green space, working with the airport on the green space over and by Chamberlain, was included in next year's task. So they thought it was just a flag, and to say it's important to connect the future bike path or shared path there to White Street as also an opportunity to connect to Winooski. So what I liked was that they were very focused on sort of the priorities we laid out. It was also shared by Erica that good news that Hubbard should be done in 2025, Spears 2025-26, and possibly Queen City approach to Red Rock. They also talked about the status of the Pennies for Paths project, and a suggestion was made that I'm sure Erica took to Andy that in the design of the upcoming webpage in Saturday, this January, to be more interactive, that for some of these projects, including when certain bike paths or shared use paths will be completed, that there be an ability to go online and basically click on it and see at what stage of the development it is, to just underscore that progress is happening and keep people focused. In addition to that, I went to, as the Green Mountain Transit Commissioner for South Burlington, went to the board meeting that led to the first decision about the cuts. So that process is ongoing. It started, a decision that could not be avoided. Also attended the CatMap Transit Summit, where I had an opportunity to speak to VTran and referenced the letter that was signed by this council regarding the reimagining route. And the feedback I got was this is exactly the kind of things that VTran is looking for, because it's about creating greater ridership, it's about connecting multiple municipalities, creating new options, and raising the ability to have efficiencies, which are important for the stick factors to get the federal grants. So that was very good to hear. So that was it. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Lori?
So on the 7th, I went to a Natural Resources Committee meeting, and they will be presenting their work plan to council on November 18th. There was quite a bit of disappointment within the committee about the decision to put the tree preservation work in, quote, the bike rack. And it raised conversation about having clarity about what the role is between committees and the council. And when committees are just following the requests of the council, when they're pursuing initiatives, how to, I know there was a lot of disappointment that they did quite a bit of work on that, thinking that it was something that was going to move forward. And it's like, it sort of popped their bubble. You know, it's like we do all this work and it doesn't do anything. Why are we doing it? So there was a frustration there. There was a conversation about, let's see now, about development and the NRCC's role in development projects, and whether there's a way for them to be engaged in the sketch plan phase of a project to have oversight, or whether they're just supposed to be having input into development through the planning commission and writing of LDRs. And there's some desire to be more than just to be able to review projects as they come up in the early stages for input. And one other thing that came up from that conversation was they were talking about noise and the chipping ordinance, which made it above the grade. And somebody mentioned concern about crushing. And apparently at some of these development sites, when they've done blasting, et cetera, they bring in rock crushers. And rock crushers are every bit as disruptive as chipping, and they go all day long. So there was a question of whether that should be considered in this language. And then on the 15th, I met with Mira Geffron at the library to discuss a showing of The Quietest Year, which is a Vermont film on noise pollution. And it looks like we're looking at a date sometime in January for that to be aired and maybe be part of a bigger movie and discussion series on noise and environment. And then on that same day, had a training and machine prep for the upcoming election. Got the machines ready to take ballots. And then on the 17th, we met and started processing early voting ballots and processed more ballots on that day than were processed in the entire election at the August primary. So we're off to a pretty banging start there. And also on the 17th, I met with Parks and Rec, which ended up not having a quorum, so we did not have a full meeting on that night. But there was a brief discussion about, I was approached by a young woman who was very interested in the possibility of starting a Friends of Red Rocks Park, knowing that Red Rocks Park is in need of a lot of attention and care, and there are public out there that would like to be engaged. So I brought that to that committee. Adam has it on the agenda coming up, and it was mentioned that there are other folks in the community who have asked about Friends of for other areas where it's Wheeler Dog Park or et cetera. And so that's something that would be nice to find a way to channel those people's energy to something positive for us. And that's it.
Thank you, Lori. Elizabeth?
Thanks, Tim. I also worked with Lori and some of you on the early testing of the Omni ballot system, and then worked on the pre-processing of ballots that finished up about 3 or 3:30 that day. And like in Chicago, vote early, vote often. I think I personally voted 500 or 600 times.
Just for the
joke.
record, not really.
It is not really
Ran other people's ballots through the
processed
machine.
early voting ballots. Actually, I have to say, and with all due respect, it is remarkable to see the work and the security of the system that the city has adopted. You know, you can't really fathom that, and you think when you go process your ballot, and you know we get a lot of write-in candidates sometimes that are a vote against somebody, and the amount of technology and double checking and security in that system was impressive. So kudos to Holly and her team. I did have a chance to watch The Quietest Year. I had an invitation to see that down at the Universal Church and had a chance to see that. So I've previewed that, as I know you have, Lori. And then met with the Charter Committee on the 16th, and they are preparing for presentation to Council on November 4th, and have some options on how to proceed. They do, as I mentioned last time, committee members would like additional information and testimony. There was a little bit of a reach out. Some initial information was obtained from town clerks in the all resident voting cities, but really taking testimony is limited by the November elections right now and access to people who have experience with that process. There are still some legal issues left open on all resident voting, and there is an expectation that council will get some guidance on filling the vacancy on the charter committee as well on November 4th. So I don't want to steal any thunder of the committee, but it was a pretty robust meeting on the 16th, and progress was made, but more work to be done.
Thanks.
Okay. So I attended the Renewable Energy Vermont conference last week. No pun intended, but lots of good energy in the room, talking about how, we meet Vermont's goals of a completely clean electricity grid by 2035. Where do we source that from? Offshore wind, more solar. Really good conversation. There was a legislative panel that talked about the Affordable Heat Act and where that might go, and there was some, concern expressed about its fate statewide. I know that's something that we kind of were counting on, from to further our goals. So I think we need to pay careful attention to where that goes. I attended Economic Development Committee meeting. They reviewed our policy and priorities. They're also going to present in November to us with their work plan. They had Nick Longo on the agenda, talked about the airport. The airport's really busy, nearing its pre-pandemic records, and they are looking to expand. They need more hangar space, and there was another discussion about the land that they had asked for rezoning a couple of years ago that's near the Chamberlain neighborhood south of the airport, the R4 zone. I think we could expect some more discussion around that, according to Nick. I also attended the BCA meeting. I was at a walk to school day at Chamberlain where we were gathering feedback on safe routes to Chamberlain in connection with the safe routes to school planning. I also attended a safe routes to school meeting. Lots going on there, but maybe just to not go through everything. Kind of two principal things. One was a lot of discussion again about the Rick Marcotte intersection and lack of clarity about how to move forward to ensure that's safe. And I know there was some back and forth with respect to, how do we get someone there before there are any infrastructure changes that maybe has some more authority than a crossing guard, and that conversation seems to be stalled. What I would love to do, and Jesse and I had a little conversation about this before the meeting, is ask Jesse to work with the district, work with Violet to present us a menu of options. And in my mind, the options are status quo, it's fine, to continue encouraging the district to hire someone, perhaps without training. 3, we hire someone that rolls up to the police department, or maybe 4, 5, and 6 that I haven't thought of, but options that we could then consider with pros and cons to address that situation. We talked about the other intersections that perhaps need crossing guards, traffic monitors. The school has advertised for traffic monitors, not crossing guards. Not clear why they've done that. They haven't been able to hire anybody. Okay. I met with Neil Lundeville, the CEO of Vermont Gas. We had a really good conversation. I had run into him at the EAN conference a month ago. And he is very familiar with our climate action plan, where we have committed to weatherize 600 housing units a year beginning in 2019. So that's probably 3,000 or so that the Climate Action Plan says we should have weatherized by now. I don't know how many we have. I suspect it's not quite that number. He offered the help of Vermont Gas. They have funding. They have workforce. He'd like us to meet with him and help him identify the big landlords, the big apartments in the city, so that he can begin that work. And I hope that we can do that, and maybe we can actually further discuss this either during other business tonight or at some other point, but I think this is something we need to discuss. Finally, folks may know, South Burlington has been designated the safest city in the U.S., and I did a podcast with the Anna and Raven Show. It's a nationally syndicated show talking about that, so if folks want to Google that, I would encourage that, and we should celebrate our designation.
Thank you, Andrew. Let's see. So I attended a planning commission meeting 2 weeks ago, and I also went to the same CATMA conference. CATMA is the Chittenden Area Transportation Management Association. It was begun by a coalition of UVM and Champlain College a long time ago, but now it includes a lot of other members. And they had a conference, a summit at UVM at the Davis Center. And so the main introductory speech was given by Mayor Emma from Burlington, and I tried to talk to her briefly, but we were cut off by the MC who was starting up. And so I didn't get a chance to really say hello, but hello. And also, they had some, Clayton was there from GMT and described the board meeting that you just talked about, where they voted on some specific cuts, right? I did ride my e-bike there at 41 degrees in the morning, right? Which was a pretty comfortable ride because, there's no bad weather, there's only bad gear, right? And then I left there, and I'll get to that part later, but they had some general speakers, and then they had some breakout sessions later on. So the two sessions they had that were really interesting was they had a rep there from Kitchener, Ontario, talking about their transit system, and they use a combination of fixed route, light rail, and microtransit, and they've seen a lot of success, and I think that their ridership is back up to where it was pre-pandemic. They also had a rep there. I'm sorry, I don't remember the names. I don't have it. Had a rep from the new North Carolina Department of Transportation, and unfortunately, he had to spend, a good 15 minutes kind of describing the situation they have there in Western North Carolina, to just keep in mind the fact that all of the work the DOT's done there over the last 25, 30 years, right? A lot of it's been wiped out. A lot of the roads are closed, and they're really challenged right now. But he did focus on some of their successful transit stories with fixed route and microtransit. So they've got to go back and now spend a lot of time rebuilding and planning and stuff. The breakout session that I attended, which I really enjoyed, was with the UVM Transportation Research Center, right? And their professor Greg Rowengold had a project for one of their PhD candidates where they got data from about 5 years from the DMV. So they got the VIN numbers, and they also got the inspection data from the other side of DMV. So they're able to marry it back up and say, these cars live in these driveways, and they are these models of these years of this hybrid EV or EV. And every time you get your car inspected, they write down your mileage, right? So they could say, so every time you get inspected, they can think back, well, over 1 year, you drove this many miles, and it's this kind of a car. And so, it's a V8 and a Toyota Tundra or whatever. So you probably got, 16 miles to the gallon. So they really could come up with a really nice graph of consumption and CO2 output and stuff like that.
That's great because we were only able to estimate it in the climate action plan.
And there's about, I think it's 4 years worth of data. And so I have the link. I'd be glad to share it with you later. That the web page has graphics that are limited to the data set that they have, and they're not getting any new data, unfortunately, right? So every month that goes along where there's another inspection cycle, they don't get that because just the way that research project was worded and carried out, it was for a set block of data. But there's opportunity here, of course, to extend that forward. And the other thing is that you can't get the raw data because it's sort of confidential, but it's not like HIPAA. But anyway, but there was fascinating amount of work. I also went to the Public Arts Committee meeting that same day by riding my bike across the Exit 14 bridge, which was it was a challenge, but it was doable. But I can see why the pedestrian bridge will be a much better option in the future. Public Arts Committee elected some officers and then started the work on drafting their annual report. There's going to be a new gallery opening on November 14th for the next artist. I can't remember her name, so I don't have that for you. And they were trying to also develop their committee work plan. I also have been receiving emails about the F-35 resolution that we passed at the last meeting. They have all been negative in the sense that they were critical of my voting yes on the resolution, but I will grant you this, they were all very civil, and I was grateful for that. And I replied to every single one of them with my reasoning as to why I voted for them. And some people replied and said, well, thank you for getting back to me so quickly, and I understand your position, but they still felt the way that they did, but that was great. And so I'm glad that I had that opportunity to converse with some people that way. I also went to a coffee with councilors on Saturday with Andrew, and there was zero coffee cost to the city because I brought my own tea kettle, my own coffee, Mr. Coffee Maker, my own coffee, 10 mugs, and some half and half. And we had one taker for the coffee, and it was Andrew. So, and he won't tell me whether it was any good or not.
It was very good.
Okay,
coffee.
good.
Thank you, Tim.
That's the first thing I was thinking about is I brewed bad coffee for that. Anyway, we had 3 attendees, and one of them was a resident of the Orchard neighborhood. And the first question out of her mouth was, "What are we doing to help the homeless as a city in South Burlington?" And that's a really interesting question. And I tried to review with her all the different locations that have real estate that's being recycled, refurbished into housing for the homeless, like the Brayburn Apartments, the Summit, off of Kennedy Drive, the Ho Hum Hotel down in Shelburne, which was done a few years ago. So there is progress there, and we also talked about concerns with the latest LDR changes and what those maximum densities could be in certain lots on the city, and that was an interesting discussion. Some people that live down by the lakeside. I also walked around the Edgewood Cider Mill 2 project yesterday just to get a walk in because it was a beautiful day. I ended up meeting a bunch of people, some that I knew from Global Foundries that I haven't seen in years because they retired, and other people that I sort of know. And so one thing that I didn't know about Edgewood is that they are natural gas, forced hot air heating systems, but they come with a dual phase heat pump so they can cool and create heat. So we had a cold snap a week ago or so, and I said, "So what did you do?" Well, most of them are like, "Well, we hardly turn on our heat anyway because these houses are so tight, right? They're very tight, and they also have a 2-inch layer of foam board on the outside of the studs, and then they put the sheathing on top of that with Ziploc system, and then they put the vinyl siding on top of that. So this is all new, latest stretch code, Act 250 energy efficiency." And one person said, "We turned on our heat pump for heat for like a few hours, and then we turned it off." So the good side of this is that I think these homes are equipped so that if it doesn't get super cold, I think they'll probably just use their heat pumps for heat until they have their own setting that kicks in the natural gas.
Presumably, those homes were built under our ordinance, which requires 85% of the heating load to be from renewable sources. So that's what that system presumably is designed to accomplish.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, I was impressed by that, and I've been through those buildings too when they were under construction, and have seen how they were built on the inside before they were finished. So I think they're good buildings, and I think people are very happy with them. About that safest city designation by Fat Wallet, is that the name of the
Wallet Hub.
Wallet Hub?
Wallet Hub.
Okay, I'm thinking of Nerd Wallet. So anyway, if you didn't know, go back and watch Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update from the week before. It's about 4 minutes in, but they actually mention that as part of a joke. We're not part of the joke, we're just part of the setup. And but they show a map of Vermont, but then they have a dot and it has Burlington, but then Colin Jost says South Burlington. So somebody sent me my son sent me the link, and I was like, what the? Anyway, so that was great. And I think that's, by the way, the streetlights are back on in South Village. Ireland found a broken breaker, and they're all working now. So thanks to my brother-in-law who lives there to report that. And that's all I have. Jesse?
Great, thanks. So a couple things. Just a reminder to the committee that our FY26 budget survey is out on the street. It will stay open through this Friday, at which point we will close it and put together a report for the council and for ourselves as we finish building the FY26 budget. We have 127 respondents so far, so it's a decent response. Just a reminder, we mentioned this at the last meeting, but the airport is having their public meetings this week on the updated draft noise exposure map. This is the map around the airport that talks about the decibel levels. The public meeting will be on this Wednesday, October 23rd at 6:30 at Chamberlain, and then a duplicate public meeting the same time the next night at the Winooski High School. So folks can go to either one. That's October 23rd and 24th. And then they have an online survey up on their website, btvsound.com, that's open until November 15th. My what's becoming weekly Longview update. So we at the request of the landowner, did not meet today, and I'm still trying to schedule another team meeting where everybody can attend. We hope that will be scheduled shortly. And then as I was just going through the agenda, realized it was left off the agenda, your preview of next agenda's meeting. So if you will bear with me for a minute, I'll just read through kind of the highlights from that.
Please.
So that includes the recommendation on coffee with a counselor that we talked about at our last meeting. We're bringing you a kind of set of recommendations about that. The LDR public hearing that you previously warned on complying with the state statute. As Councilor Fitzgerald mentioned, the recommendation from the Charter Committee on all resident voting. Look at staff has been working with the library trustees on updating our memorandum of understanding between the city and the library trustees. That hasn't been open for about 10 years. So we are bringing you a proposed update to that. As one of you mentioned, the Public Art Committee will be talking about their FY25 work plan. We plan to bring to you, or the VTANG plans to bring to you, a request about their water that was contaminated by PFAS, and potentially us accepting it through our water treatment system. Perhaps an update on NEAT if we get a meeting scheduled, the Longview property project, and then, of course, the executive session on civil litigation that you are not hearing tonight.
May I ask a question real quick? While we're, the VTANG, is that VTANG or Army National
Or
Guard?
National Guard,
It is
sorry.
National Guard.
National
Okay, so
Guard.
it's about the PFAS foam spill.
Yes, so
Okay.
they've been as you previously heard the Colonel talk about, they have had an on-site treatment system in place since that spill, and they need to decide what to do with that treated water, either provide it to us for processing through our plant or truck it to Idaho. So he will be coming with a request and a recommendation about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I
Is that
ask a
all?
quick question, Tim? Jesse, where are we advertising the budget survey? Do you recall?
So it's been in City News. Andy posted it on Front Porch Forum at your request from the last meeting. It's been, I believe, co-promoted in the school newsletter. It's up on our website. It's on our Facebook page. There was an ad in the other paper at least once. Am I forgetting anything big, Andy? No, those are the
Yeah, I
highlights.
would just encourage, again, the social media and the Front Porch Forum again to solicit as much feedback from the community as possible.
Can we tweet something about it as well? I mean, I know there's probably not a lot of people looking at. I call it Twitter. Okay, to me, it's still Twitter. I'm not going to call it that other thing yet.
There's
all
some other things going on in the world right now.
right? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we will do one more
Okay.
big push out.
Because the tweets
Widely.
coming out of Parks and Recs are really great, and they're
Adam's
quite
pretty
often.
awesome.
And as soon as they get liked, it's me, usually. So
Thank you.
great, thank you, Jesse. So moving on to item 6, which is the consent agenda, and I'm going to read it first, and then we'll talk about it. Okay. So item A is consider and sign disbursements. B, which is approve the minutes from June 3rd, 2024 and June 10th, 2024. C, approve amendment number 2 with Hoyle, Tanner and Associates for the completion of the final engineering for the upgrade to the Bartlett Bay wastewater treatment facility. Item D, authorize the city manager to enter a contract with VHB to complete the city center traffic circulation study. Item E, approve and adopt resolution 2024-23, approving and authorizing the execution of all documents necessary to effectuate the permanent conservation of approximately 105 acres of the Wheeler Nature Park and pay to Vermont Land Trust the total sum of $41,200 from the city's Open Space and Conservation Fund. And finally, item F, which is accept the warranty deed of easement from QHC Lot 3 LLC dated October 2nd, 2024, and the deed of easement from the Burlington U-Mall owner LLC dated July 23rd, 2024, and authorize the city manager to execute the license and agreement to indemnify and hold harmless with the Champlain Water District for the purpose of completing the bike and ped bridge over Interstate 89. So there's, I think, Councilor Scanlon has requested that we pull out item E and discuss that separately. So that leaves A, B, C, D, and F. If nobody else has any objections, I would entertain a motion to approve items A, B, C, D, and F.
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So that's unanimous. Now going on to item E. Mike, what did you want to say about item E?
As the previous time this issue came up, I am going to recuse myself from this, since I live in the neighborhood, and I want to maintain a perception throughout the city of impartiality on issues.
Thank you. So Councilor Scanlon's going to recuse himself from item E. So can I have a motion to approve item E by itself?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second, but I have some discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. It sounds like there's some discussion.
So the conservation easement allows the city to harvest high quality saw logs and conduct other timber harvesting in the Wheeler Nature Park. I don't see that as a consistent use, something that should be permitted in a nature park. I can see that in, various other municipal owned lands, perhaps, but not a nature park. And I would like to change that.
I'm thinking there's probably something called a forest management plan, right, that needs to be executed in lands like that. And there are times when you do want to harvest some logs when it's necessary.
When it's necessary,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
For
Well, this, I mean,
invasives
it
or
doesn't
for,
say, doesn't it? It gives them the. I think that it gives them the permission to do it. Doesn't say when you have to do it or how you have to do it.
This talks about timber harvesting, not to harvest to address invasives or to address issues that may come up. This talks about commercial high quality saw logs, which I think is inappropriate.
So just a quick feedback on that. Having been in the wood industry my whole life and had foresters that I've spoken to, and I think Ethan Tapper might be a really good person to get some feedback on this from. But in effective management of woodlots and nature areas, there are times when it is appropriate to harvest and actually get a resource from that property with maintaining it as a nature preserve. And I don't think, I know that this is in every one of their easements that they've done, and it's not clear cutting. And maybe there should be something in there that says that you can't do clear cutting or extensive, but selective cutting at times can be incredibly beneficial to a forest landscape. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I don't think it's the land trust's intention to clear cut the whole property.
Well, it's ours, the city.
Yeah, no, I know, but I mean, it sounds like it's a standard item in all of their easement applications, right? So I don't understand why you're worried about it, because I think it's probably part of an effective forest management program. And
So
you
I'll
have to
just-
have one of
yeah,
those
I'll
if
just
you're going to have
express my
this.
concern one more time. So there are certainly times, and we've seen it in the Great Swamp, when it's necessary to clear to allow other, tree species that are native to flourish and grow, and that's fine. When I read this, that's not what it's talking about, and that's my concern and objection. I just don't think what I'm reading here about harvesting high quality saw logs, not in connection with addressing invasives or to allow natives to flourish. If it was so qualified, I'd be fine, but it's not. And that's my concern, and that's my objection.
Well, with all due respect, are you an expert in forest management?
No, I'm not. I'm just
I'm
reading
not
the
either,
words.
but I think I would trust the land trust to be the one
No,
to
this
make a
is-
final decision on that.
Well, it's our decision, Tim. This is a generic easement, not necessarily directed toward a nature park. It's a generic easement for any working forest lands owned by a municipality. And my perspective is it should be tailored to a nature park. I don't think it is.
I don't understand what your objection is, because at some point they're going to want to take some logs out for whatever reason, and if they can sell them, they should sell them as well, right? Because especially if it's a high quality wood.
If there's a corollary reason to do it to improve the health of the forest, yes.
And so why would they not do that if it's a
I
conservation
just don't
easement?
think that's what this easement says.
Okay, and that's your opinion.
Yep.
And you have a different opinion.
I trust the integrity of the land trust and the intention of this easement. I wouldn't be at all opposed to having language that was more specific placed in it, but I think that the land is being placed in good hands, and I don't feel like it's necessary.
Does this mean you're not going to vote on this tonight? You're not going to vote yes because of this
Yes.
language?
Yes.
So it means you're going to vote no?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I guess our options are to pull this for further review with the city attorney and the land trust?
So it looks like Colin's standing
Would-
up. If you would like us to negotiate a different deal, we were trying to move this forward. It's been in the works for a number of years, so we were trying to move it forward quickly. If you would like to have us change parameters of what you would like us to negotiate with them, we can go back to the drawing board and have those conversations.
So there are two choices here. One is that somebody gets back to Andrew and educates him on what their intent is with that part of the easement, or two, we ask the land trust to reword it somehow.
I
Right?
think the motion from the council needs to be either provide us direction to do something
Okay.
else, or consider
If,
approval.
if you
for
receive
tonight.
proper feedback, would you be convinced to go ahead and support it?
I'd love to hear what Colin has to say.
Hi, Colin McNeil, City Attorney.
Hold the microphone closer.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for considering this. We've been working a lot with the Vermont Land Trust on this project and putting forth this conservation easement. This is a document that this is an easement that has been worked on for many years. I mean, you go back to 2018, previous to that, 2021, we entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Vermont Land Trust. And with that was attached a document very similar to the one that is before you tonight. The Land Trust wanted to be here tonight, and unfortunately, Bob Heiser from the Land Trust is also up in Enosburg. He's available a little bit later tonight, but he's doing double duty. So if you want to hear from him, he can be available at a later time. So if you have questions directly for the Land Trust, we can make that happen at a future date. I would just point out that in the document itself, it says that we may not engage in the type of activity that Andrew has been talking about unless with a timber management plan that would have to be worked out with the Vermont Land Trust. So there certainly are restrictions on what we can do or what the rights are granted under this easement. It is very limiting to the city. We can't just go in and clear cut without Vermont Land Trust's approval. It would have to be according to a plan that was approved by a forester and any number of checks and balances on that. So I just wanted to highlight that to make sure that information was in front of you. But if it is the council's will, we can go back to the Land Trust and talk with them about trying to remove this language, or at a future meeting, we can come back and bring the Land Trust here, who can explain what their intentions are and what their purposes are with this language that they include in their conservation easements.
Colin, did you say that Bob could be available later this evening if that was desired?
He can be available electronically by Zoom. Enosburg has been gracious enough to give him a room to speak to us from.
I was going to
Oh,
say,
wow.
because maybe his feedback could help us
Good
move this
timing.
along.
He's muted.
Hello, I just joined, so hello, everybody, and if I missed a question, or if a question was just asked me, I just missed it.
Thanks, Bob. Can you give us some expand upon the part of the easement that talks about timber management and the saw logs and what that means for that land?
Yeah, so I will try to open that as we're speaking, but essentially, if I'm thinking of the area of the easement that you're talking about, so there's part of the easement that says you have the right to manage the forest, and that includes if you choose to manage and sell timber, you can do that. It would need to be according to a forest management plan that we would need to approve. And I think that the saw timber section is likely saying in the purposes of the management of the land, we would be approving that management plan with the perspective that longer rotations with growing timber rather than kind of just continually, say, clear cutting for pulp, would be an acceptable way for us to say no to a management plan. If it's, as long as it's something that is managing for the long term and long rotations, we just want to set that expectation up front, and that forest management plan would need to be improved. Happy to answer any follow-up if that didn't answer the exact question.
So, Bob, it's not necessarily, say, in connection with opening up an area of the nature park to allow native species to flourish or to address invasives. What you're saying, this really allows harvesting, long-term harvesting, but harvesting.
Right. And there's nothing to require that, but yes, if the community wanted to build that into a management plan in the future, the easement would be open to that. And a lot of town-owned lands do that, and it can coincide with things like managing for wildlife habitat in a way that wouldn't happen as quickly without some active management.
And that's something you imagine that VLT would approve if we asked.
Yeah, as long as it's according to a forest management plan that has good silvicultural and wildlife habitat balances, yep, we approve those.
And this probably
regularly.
applies to those, towns that own large tracts of
Exactly.
forest land,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
That
Not
are-
nature parks.
Yeah.
Do you feel that that kind of harvesting would be inappropriate for land that's being conserved as a nature park? Or do you feel that it could be compatible with the land being a nature park?
In our kind of management of the easement, yes, we could see situations that it could be compatible with a nature park to do some active management. But again, it's nothing that is required, obviously.
How difficult would it be to limit the easement such that we couldn't do active timber management except to address issues like biodiversity, invasives, native species management?
Yeah, we tend to not hold, so there's a range of conservation easement types, and the ones that you're talking about are often called something like forever wild easements that have very limited potential for timber management. And that is one approach, but not one that we typically do. We are typically having easements that if the community does see a benefit to do a harvest, that it would be consistent with the conservation easement, again, with limitations.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. So Andrew, does that satisfy you?
No.
Why doesn't it? I don't understand what the problem is. It would be our request that we would like to do some timber harvesting.
Yeah.
So they would have to agree with it, though.
It sounds like they would. Agree with it.
It depends. It depends if it met a forest management plan. Well, what do we have out there? We have a forest.
I'm not comfortable with an easement that allows some future council to cut the forest down. It's a nature park. I mean, what's the purpose of the easement then? It doesn't, I'm sorry, it doesn't sit well with me. I think it should be more of the forever wild type easement. It's a nature park. It's not a working forest.
So this is really unfortunate that we've gone this far in negotiation.
Have we ever seen this draft as a council? This is the first time I've ever seen it. Have we ever seen this?
There's been the work started in
But
2016.
have I ever seen it? Because if I did, I apologize that I missed it. This is the first time I've ever read it.
These easements, they're.
Have you seen it?
I haven't, but I've seen other easements, right? And
Sure, there's
this
all
is-
different kinds, as Bob said. I'm surprised that this is an easement designed for working forests and not for natural
Well, I think
areas.
this section of the easement applies to if you had part of a forest on it that you wanted to manage. This gives you the ability to do that.
I understand.
So you're ready to torpedo the whole thing because of this?
I'd like it. I think we should change it.
I don't think it needs changing personally. I like it just the way it is because it gives that flexibility in the future for what needs to be done with the wood.
Why doesn't someone make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion. I actually have some other comments to make.
You have to vote on the motion. It's on the table. Sorry.
Well, I have some other discussion, but I don't know how you want to close this out. But I do think Andrew's request has to require a second to have any motion with it. Because I don't think that's happened yet.
So I think, sorry, I confused you. You have a motion on the table to approve E. It's open for discussion. So, but somebody could
So I
call
would
the
like to approve
question,
it subject to
or somebody could call the question, or you could entertain an amendment to
a
that
friendly
motion.
amendment to approve the easement, subject to modifying it to restrict the situations where we can choose to harvest timber to situations that address the health of the forest, including biodiversity, invasives, etc.
Do you see any situation, and I'm bringing this up having worked with high quality saw logs most of my life and knowing the value of really beautiful timber. Do you see any circumstance where it would be appropriate for selective cutting to happen on that land in the future? And if so, is there a way to word it so that that could happen in the context of a nature park in your mind?
If you want to suggest something.
I'm sorry, can I jump in from a process standpoint? So
Yes.
I don't mean to speak for Colin or Bob, but I don't think you can approve it conditionally tonight because what's before you is what's been negotiated with the Vermont Land Trust.
Yes.
So if you want to make changes to it, I think you have to either abandon your motion and table this, or make and then make a motion to direct us what you would like to negotiate, give us more guidance on what you would like us to negotiate in the future with Vermont Land Trust or another party.
So, a question for Bob. Bob, do you see a way that the language for tree cutting could be more restrictive and acceptable to you folks, or is that a possibility, or is that sort of would torpedo this agreement?
Yeah, I was going to offer, we did early on sign a memorandum of understanding because it is important for us to be comfortable holding a conservation easement that we are comfortable with. And we do hold something like 2,300 conservation easements across the state. And so we've gotten a sense of what we feel comfortable restricting a community from doing or being open to at least the possibility for. And so this is very much the part of our typical conservation easement on publicly owned lands. So we would need to, it would be hard for us just to kind of modify a piece here and there. So we're hoping we can rest on the easement that we had in the MOU, which was the point of having it early, was just to make sure everybody was on board before we went through a lot of work.
And a follow-up question to that: of the 2,000 some easements that you are holding, have there been any instances where forest management plans were more aggressive than what members of the community were expecting and have caused upset, or has it been a pretty effective tool in your mind?
There have been cases that we felt something was, and again, we hold easements on privately owned land and on publicly owned land. So there have definitely been cases where we thought proposals that were too aggressive, more aggressive than we would feel comfortable approving. There have been cases that communities do harvest on and it's broadly supported. There are other cases where the community did not feel like they were well informed enough of a harvest before it happened, and that tends to be the source of the issue if there is one on the harvest like that. But in general, it works well. Heinsberg uses some of their wood for the flooring of their new town hall.
So
Exactly. Yeah.
given what Bob said, I don't want to torpedo this. I was really hoping we could change it if VLT is resistant to doing that. I just have to say, I think this has not been a good process. I think the council needs to see these documents before at this stage so we can give input. This is something that's really important to the community, and it's upsetting to me that we're being asked to approve this at the very last minute without being able to provide sufficient input.
And I'm upset the fact that they've gone through this negotiation process, and it started in 2016, and this is a standardized type of easement, right, that they have done on thousands of different properties. And you are stopping it right now because of one nitpicking event over this logging, wording.
Right.
So I just want to make that statement, okay?
That's fine. I
Okay,
disagree
just,
with your characterization.
we're down to 4 votes anyway, right, because of one recusal to start with, okay? And then,
Tim, I said, given what Bob said, I
so
don't want
like,
to
why
kill
don't we
the-
just table this then, right?
No.
Said he would vote yes.
I said.
Well, you said
given-
you would vote yes.
I said
A
given.
second ago, you said you weren't going to vote.
You weren't listening. I
Can I just
said.
point one thing out?
It was in the 10-4 packet. So if we're going to be criticized for process here, this was in the easement draft was in your October 4th, 2021
Okay, 21.
packet. And when
Okay.
when new councils pick up and
Okay.
carry long-term projects forward, which you do all the time, every meeting, there is an obligation on all sides to know what you're talking about. We were very clear that this has been presented for many years to the council. So if there is criticism of process, I think it needs to be on both sides.
That's fine. It would have been nice to have seen this, for me to have seen it earlier. Having said that, what I just said, Tim, was that I'm actually surprised by Bob's response, but given his response, that VLT doesn't really sound open to negotiating this, I'm going to vote yes. I wish it were otherwise. I wish we could renegotiate it, because I really think it's a mistake, and that's where I come out.
Okay, thank
I
you.
would like to point out one other piece of language in here in the conservation easement itself. It does say disapproval by grantee, which is Vermont Land Trust, of a forest management plan proposing a heavy cut shall not be deemed unreasonable. So it really gives Vermont Land Trust the opportunity, and it is explicit here, that it's not unreasonable for them to deny a forest management plan or reject a forest management plan if they don't agree with it, or if it proposes a heavy cut that they feel is inappropriate. So it's laid out right here that is an option for them and moving forward.
Thank you. Elizabeth, did you have some discussion?
I did, yeah. A couple of quick things. One, consistent with Jesse's feedback, being a new counselor, as many of you know, Colin, you in particular, I had many, many questions on the draft. So thank you all. I'm very grateful for the responses I got back to the many questions I sent over the weekend. One quick thing, I did disclose this during our initial conversations, but I reside on Park Road, which there's a southern, very thin sliver of the easement that goes down parallel to Dorset Street behind my property, but it is closer to Butler Farms, and it is not directly abutting my property, which is part of a larger association. So I am disclosing that. I am not recusing myself from a vote. I did want to clarify, were the funds in the Open Space and Conservation Fund, were those held in reserve for this project?
I don't know what you mean by held in
Well,
reserve.
we identified them before, so are
Yes.
they budgeted, basically? Okay.
Yes.
And then the last question I had, and I think, Colin, you answered this, but I recall reading in all the documentation I got that management plans did need to be updated approximately every 10 years and required public input. So I saw that there was a 2015 management plan and a 2024 interim addendum. The addendum did not include public input, I believe, but can you just clarify the 10-year period? Maybe I just
I
misread
did look
that.
through that, and I believe the 10-year period involves the forest management plan, not the other plan, not the management plan that we're talking about.
Okay, is there a frequency on updating the management plan?
I don't believe so. I don't think there's plans to update it right now. I think anytime we would update it would be with a public process, and certainly in connection with the Vermont Land Trust, but there isn't a specific timeline outlined in there for updating the management plan itself.
Okay, I would just leave that as a question of follow-up, is what's a reasonable time frame the public could expect an update to that plan, whether it's the forest management plan or the overall management plan? I don't think it can be answered
Just a quick
necessarily.
note on that. We are, as part of, just a reminder to, connecting history and dots here. We are undergoing right now a Parks and Open Space Master Plan. Part of that will be a commentary on management plans citywide. And that will be a very active community conversation. So it may not be specifics about this, but how we use management plans citywide that we can incorporate into a future update to this.
Thank you.
Is that the end of your, okay. So we have a motion and a second on the table. You ready for the vote? We have one recusal. We'll mention that at the afterwards. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And Councilor Scanlon recused himself. Otherwise, it was 4 ayes. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you, Colin.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
So moving on to item 7, which is receive a presentation from the faith influenced leaders on youth mental health in South Burlington.
I'd like to thank Jessie for this project moving ahead at warp speed since she came on board, compared to the prior 10 years of effort. And of course, this council's support of her effort. I think it wouldn't have happened without her devotion to this project and with your support. So thank you, Jessie.
Mr. Mittag, I don't think it would have happened without your support.
I think that's a much more accurate statement.
Introduce myself, Michael Mittag. I'm a member of the South Burlington Land Trust.
Thank you. So moving on to number 7, we have Patrick Leduc in front of us, the president of the Faith Influenced Leaders. Good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having us. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. And I will start by just saying thank you very much for your service to our community, all of you. As Tim said, I serve as the president of the Faith Influence Leaders Corporation, a nonprofit that was created around 2019 right here in South Burlington. I want a little agenda for today. These are largely the materials that we shared with the groups that we met with almost over a year ago now about what's happening with our youth. I want to just touch basically on who is the Faith Influence Leader so you know who you're talking to. Then I'll cover a selection of the indicators that we've talked about with our youth, a few findings and conclusions that we came from as a result of that. And there is not technically a call to action right now for all of you, but we'd like to start a conversation around what we can do with our youth. So let me start at the beginning. Who is the Faith Influence Leaders Corporation? See if I can navigate my slides here. As I mentioned, it's a nonprofit that was created a couple years ago. The members are on the screen that we've shared. I won't read them all off to you. Our focus is largely in twofold. One, we are all members of our faith communities. They are not all the same faith communities. And we all have some level of leadership, whether that be in our workplace, in our families, in our community, in some form. And the goal of this group has always been and will remain taking the opportunity to learn from each other, grow with each other, and then take those secular skills that we learn in our whatever the environment is, and the love that comes out of our faith to support our community in whatever form we feel like we are called to do. And you will probably know us most from our efforts to create the South Burlington Food Shelf, which is over here on Dorset Street. Really started as Carol over at Common Roots started a little pantry there, and we've taken some of her learnings and a ton of community involvement, a ton of community effort in various ways, volunteering, finance, and donations of food to create a community food shelf that is really run by the community. And the Faith Influence Leaders still is responsible for that. We file the taxes, we pay the bills, but we try to be a little bit behind the scenes and allow the community to run this themselves for the community that they love. As that was running so smoothly, we said, well, what else can we do to help our community? Because we've really moved in the food shelf, because we have a great director and we have great volunteers, largely into a role of governance. And so we said, well, we can't sit on our laurels. What else can we do? And what kept coming to mind for us is our youth. How can we support our youth? Knowing that coming out of the pandemic, obviously our youth was a big part of what we were thinking about, especially their mental health. But largely, youth mental health has been a challenge, not just in Vermont, but in our country and in the world, frankly, for a long, long time. So we spent a lot of time when we started the food shelf trying to get smart about what's going on with food insecurity in Vermont and in our community. So we met with a lot of individuals and tried to learn as much as we could about that issue. And we said, if we're going to work with trying to figure out how we can help our youth, we need to do the same exercise. So we held a couple of meetings. First ones we were called Meeting with Experts. And you can see some of the names of the people that we met with there, really trying to learn what's going on in the mental health space and what's working well and what's not working well. Where is there a need for advocacy? Where are there gaps? What can we learn from all of them? And then we had another meeting with what we called stakeholders. So those are people that may be not directly working with youth on mental health issues, but are interacting with youth and can see the outcomes of the mental health challenges that our youth are facing. And I want to point this out really quickly before I get too far down the road here. This is not a problem with our youth, all right? I want to be really careful about how we frame this. The mental health crisis in our country, whether it's youth or adults, is a pervasive problem. Our youth are amazingly resilient, powerful young people, but situations arise where they're confronted by issues, and that's what we want to help. So this is not a blame the youth. This is not the youth are weak. The youth are amazing. We want to support them as much as possible. And to date, when we had these meetings, we were not yet successful in getting youth at the table. So any actions that we eventually take need to have youth fully engaged at the table to help us figure out how we can best help them. Can't help them without having their voice there. So I wanted to just share a little bit, and I'll cull through all these slides relatively quickly. This is the Vermont Youth Risk Behavior Survey. I'm sure all of you have looked at this at some point or look at it on a regular basis. This is the 2021 data, which I believe is still the most current data. And there's a couple of slides that I wanted to highlight some points on, and then we can get into the findings that we had, and then what we think the action items for our community could look like. So on this slide about poor mental health, during the past 30 days, students said a third of the students said they reported their mental health was not good at least most of the time. And so that catches my attention. Most of the time, a third of students are saying their mental health is not in a good place. If we jump to the next page, 3 in 10 students felt so sad or hopeless almost every day for at least 2 weeks during the past 12 months. They stopped doing their normal, usual activity. That's 30%. And when we presented this, we didn't have the data from, we presented this to the community initially. We did not have the data from prior years, but we've now added that, as you can see. In 2009, that was 21, then it grows to 25, 31% in 2019, and then 2021, still sitting at that 30% level. And as you look down this, you can see that female students and students of other populations are in much worse shape as well. So a lot of work we can do there. I'm going to jump to the self-harm slide. 1 in 5 students reported hurting themselves without wanting to die, such as cutting or burning on purpose in the last 12 months. That's 20%. And again, same thing. That number since 2009 has risen from 15 to 16 to 19%. And again, we'll see BIPOC and other groups are hurting in this capacity as well. And then this slide, 1 in 7 students made a plan about how they would attempt suicide. 14%. So let's just sit there for a second. We have 14% of kids have made a plan on how they're going to attempt suicide. So the challenge that we have through this is we have plenty of people working in mental health, and they're doing a tremendous job. But what you'll see through this slide is that we have a real lack of preventative care in our community. And that's not, again, unique to us, but we could be a leader in this way. And then this one, during the past 12 months, 7% of students actually attempted suicide. And again, that moves from 4 to 5 and now at 7%. And we don't know what it is in 2024, obviously, but if you talk to students, there's a number of them that are struggling. If you talk to teachers, they'll say the same thing. So, what did we find through our exercise? So, we had conversations with experts and stakeholders, as I mentioned, and I want to be careful. We do not represent ourselves as mental health experts. That's not our job. That's not what we want our job to be. What we want to be able to do is advocate and find ways to help our youth, give them tools, give them resources, and potentially give them places to go when they are needing of support, and hopefully even before they need that support. That's the real win if we can get ahead of this somehow. So, some of our findings. The treatment for mental health, illness, and drug addiction in youth and for more is really where most of the energy is going. We're seeing funding for all organizations is inadequate, and that's a situation that we need to figure out how, as a community, that we can advocate in Montpelier for more funding. As you all know, Centerpoint School closed in South Burlington to lack of funding. And if you talk to Howard Mental Health, back when we talked with them, about 80 families were on their waiting list that time. So the tremendous need out there that is not yet being fulfilled. Mental health is the most rapidly growing problem faced by the South Burlington Fire Department. Again, when we sat down with stakeholders and we sat down with experts, these are the comments that we heard again and again. The fire department isn't necessarily, that's not their focus, is mental health, which is understandable. Children's access to technology and how it's used is a major concern. It can also be a great resource, but it's also a major concern for students, and it's a concern that you hear from parents and you hear from teachers. Neglect, abuse in the home, food insecurity, housing insecurity, all of this builds up to creating situations where mental health issues are going to be on the rise. The UVM emergency department receives children in crisis. It was shocking to me that some of the youngest patients are 7 and 8 years old presenting with major mental health crisis. It's in the emergency room. As one person said, and I think we'll see this in a second, when we see situations with students, it's usually not just a student situation or a young person situation. It's a problem in the household in many cases. Service providers are getting calls from families regarding younger children, as we just talked about. Schools obviously have good support systems, but they're limited in what they can do. And services need to extend way beyond the 9 to 5 that is available in schools. This is something, this first bullet here, there seems to be an increase in the haves and the have-nots. That's obviously not a data-centric piece, but when we talk to professionals that are working with youth on a regular basis, more so in the stakeholder group, that is the essence of what they're hearing, is that there's a bigger divide and perhaps an apathy now of that between the haves and the have-nots. Obviously, that's an opinion, not so much data. There is obviously political challenges sometimes with focusing on social and emotional learning, and there's also an affordability crisis that creates kind of longer-term challenges. I think we say here about talking about the simple practice of going to starting get involved in soccer or some other sport that costs a little bit of money. If you don't get started early, you're not really going to be included in the years later, and that creates isolation, sometimes bullying, those types of things. And then when we had our community conversation after the experts and the stakeholders, we had a few more observations. Black and brown young people talking about mental health is taboo as well, is what we heard. We need to find people that look like them, that they can relate to, that convince them that it's okay to talk about those things. The isolation, obviously, during the pandemic raised the bar on mental health. And preventative efforts should include getting off the phones. Again, we heard that earlier already. And then lack of places to go, youth after school, not as good as surrounding communities, some people said. But again, that's an area that we're focused on in our findings, is how do we create more spaces for our youth? This is when I know Travia's Infinite Youth Center is in a bit at risk right now, but she's done some good work with students there. And the SB mentoring program has also closed down. So that was another support system for young people, another caring adult in their life that unfortunately is no longer part of our programs. So as we looked at all of that as the Faith Influence Leaders Group and with the community, we're asking ourselves, we're asking you, we're asking the school board, we're asking our community, so now what? If we know this, what should we do? And so here's some of our conclusions that we walked away with that we want to share with you and we want to share with the rest of the community. There's a serious lack of funding and personnel resources to support organizations addressing youth mental health. I think that's clear, and if you talk to almost any legislature that's focused on this, they'll say the same thing. So what are our actions there? probably advocacy, probably getting this message out to more people and see if we can find some funding in what we all acknowledge is a financially tight environment right now. Almost all of the existing services focus on treatment of youth mental health and drug addiction. Entirely appropriate. We need those services. We don't want to take away from that. But at the same time, there are very few preventative programs. There's not a lot of mental health hygiene happening. There's not spaces that youth can go. So we need to advocate for increased funding and the creation of potential preventative supports that in our community. There are some models in place on drug addiction and other issues that provide alternatives for children. Possible action that we came from that is a community-driven youth drop-in center, and we've been talking a lot about this. We think this is a really powerful opportunity for our community. If we were to create a space for youth to go to, where they have caring adults around them outside of the school time, in the evenings, on the weekends, during the summer, where it's their space, they belong, all kinds of kids. No, we're not trying to find a space for kids that are challenged by mental health or by drug abuse. We're trying to find a space for our youth, period. And having a space that they can get to and they can get back from with caring adults like mentors would be a powerful, powerful outcome for our community. And then, of course, that has to come with transportation because students aren't going to be able to get there. If we can build a building, and if the kids that live walking distance, maybe they can come, but the rest are not going to be there in those late evenings or weekends or in the summer because they can't get there. So whatever solution we come up with is a solution that requires transportation to get the kids there. So our significant takeaways, which I've already talked about, virtually all current resources addressing youth mental health are utilized by organizations focusing on treatment and family support mechanisms. Powerful stuff. We need to keep doing that. Where the community can make a difference is in creating additional infrastructure and programs that focus on preventative measures that will engage risks that are at youth and those that are not at risk in a wider spectrum of time throughout the day, to include weekends. And the community must be bold and commit to investments in this. And so by leaning into this preventive work, we can reduce the number of young people that go into mental health crisis in the first place. So that overworked, overburdened system, we're not going to be able to solve that as a community of lay people that are not professionals in that space. But if we can take work and do work that says instead of 100 kids or 200 kids going into that system, we've created spaces and environments so that now only 50 kids are going into that because the other 50 are not in an environment where that's triggering them into a bad situation. And so that makes the whole system easier to manage, and it makes our community a better community, and it makes stronger young people that grow into adults in our community. So we think there's an opportunity there. What we're doing now is sharing this information with anybody that will listen to us, frankly. And we want to really start talking about how we can create public partnerships, public and private partnerships to create a space that our youth can get to, that they feel belongs to them, that they own it, that there's some caring adults in there. It's open the hours that they need it to be open, and that we have transportation to get them there back and forth. And so we've had conversations with a number of entities that do this work or similar work, and I'm not going to name any of them and get them to be committed to anything, but they're very interested in this. If we can find enough resources to create a facility or purchase a facility, create the infrastructure for it, we've got groups that would be very interested and that know how to create these environments, building those the internal people infrastructure and helping to manage that. So we think there's a really important call to action for our entire community, whether that be funding from an organization like the city or the school district or donations like we run the food shelf, and then have that be a sustainable program for our community. So I'll stop there and see if you have any questions for me.
Well, I'll throw a question out, and thank you for the presentation and the research. So are we looking at phones as a cause of part of the problem or as a symptom of part of the problem, or is it a combination of both? Because it can cause fear of missing out, right, FOMA, and it can also cause bullying and exclusion and perpetuation of awful memes and stereotypes and criticism, and there's a lot of negative energy. First of all, there's a lot of negative energy in the internet universe, right? That is completely accessible to anybody with one of these. And I'm getting it now in Twitter. And I didn't ask for it, but somebody, right, with the initials EM decided to send me messages and suggestions for things I should look at that I don't want to look at, right? And I can't imagine what it's like for a younger person who is on Instagram and Facebook and every other social media platform where they're just inundated with some corporate algorithm that's trying to decide what's good for the company to give to them, right? As opposed to what's really good for the youth in general. So,
Yeah.
and I know that the school system is starting to address that now, right? By shutting down access to phones during the school day, that's a really, and I think a lot of schools are doing that across the whole country, which is a great idea, but it doesn't get to the source of the problem. And I think you've pointed out that the kids from the greater have-not portion are at higher risk probably. And I'm just trying to think back to my childhood. It's like, well, what's missing today from their childhoods that produces these issues that they don't have? And, is it, I don't know what, I'm sure there are a lot of things that are missing. And I'm sure a lot of things that happened in 2008, 9, and 10 with the Great Recession, right, going into the pandemic, which was a complete isolation event, right, had a disastrous effect on people's, habits and family interactions and things like that, especially for that 1-2 year segment of a generation. So, what else, Lori?
I have a question, but I want to start by thanking you for doing this work and shining a light on a really critical issue for our community, and one which is a precursor to what we're experiencing with the unhoused population and other issues that we're seeing in our adult population. That represent some severe issues in our community fabric. Some of the statistics you gave about depression, anxiety, etc., was there any deeper digging into what those causes were, whether it's environmental stress or the stress of the environment or internet or politics or isolation? If there's Tim was talking about, if we know where those issues are arising from, we might have an easier time of helping work with them.
Yeah, it's a great question, and in part, I want to go back and say I'm not a mental health expert, so I want to be careful about what I say here. But I don't. There's all kinds of things that are driving adults and youth into crisis in various ways, right? And one of the things that we keep thinking about as we mull on this and we keep kind of chewing on what can we do is we can create environments where some of that is not in their face. I mean, the phones, as you mentioned, Tim, are a challenge. I would encourage anybody that has not seen it yet to watch Bess O'Brien's film, Listen Up Vermont, from a couple years ago. They have a great section about what's happening, especially with technology and youth. And I just keep saying, compared to my childhood, us adults should never talk to children about our childhood because it's not relevant to them. But, I couldn't see all the really terrible things happening in the world instantaneously, and they can. And that's got to weigh on them, right? I mean, how could it not weigh on them? So I think there's so many different things. I think if we had a space that, again, the students said, this is our space, we belong here, all of us, right? Not just the ones that are in need of some support, but all of us belong here. And there's some caring adults here, and it's easy to get to, and it's easy, and I can get home, and I'm not now at home by myself because my parents have to work 2 jobs because they can't make ends meet. And then maybe I get into some bad habits, and then I meet somebody, and then that triggers something else, and suddenly things spiral out of control. We just need to create more spaces for all of our youth to support each other and so that we can support them.
Patrick, thank you. The stat about attempted suicides is terrifying.
It is.
And I have probably more, unfortunately, personal experience with that than I'd like, so I can really empathize.
I'm sorry to hear that.
With that. And I love the food shelf. I've been there, I've helped there. I know what an unbelievable service that is to community, so thank you for doing that too. I completely agree that a youth center is something that would be really beneficial to this community, and I hope we can talk about that and get partners to help with that. And I am certain that there is a mental health crisis among our youth. But one thing I just do want to ask you, just so we understand it just a little more particularity, the data that you have is statewide data.
Yes.
So we can all observe, South Burlington, our youth, our kids, but do you have any data around South Burlington itself, how we're faring, which then kind of really informs our decision making?
Yeah. No, I that's a great question, and it's a fair question. Let me do a little bit more work to see if we can find some localized data. I don't know if that exists or not, but we can check into it. I want to just clarify. So the first set of slides from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, that was obviously statewide. Everything after that was coming out of local community meetings. But it's a fair question.
I had a question. Has this been presented to the school district yet, Patrick?
I'm meeting with the school district next week, I think.
Okay, because obviously, and you and I know that's sort of the first point of contact between educators and after-school programs and that sort of thing. So we also know that there was a lot of shifting from state-sponsored social services that came into the school system over many, many years and came with the requirement to provide the service without a funding model or without a budget. And this year we're going to be faced with a big school budget as well. And there's potential to be having conversations about cuts in things that we all know are important, like after-school programs and sports activities and co-curriculars and such. But I'll be curious to see this or hear the school's input as well, since I know that what I have heard over many, many years from educators and from administrators are that schools are not only being asked to provide services, but they're asked also to be referral or references to other services as well, without sort of a link to it. Kind of is a handoff without a lot of follow-up or continuity for that service. I know the school district has goals to have X number of students participating in extracurricular activities, so that, to me, though, those are all complementary goals, so that you're catching every kid in a way that's meaningful. And I think transportation is a challenge, and we know that just getting kids to school is a challenge, let alone getting them to other activities on weekends or after school. One thing that has changed a lot over the years is the screening of the adults that work with children. I mean, even volunteers in a school system where your own children go require a screening process. So there's hurdles now to, and for good reasons, but safety hurdles in administering programs like this. My real comments are, I think there's a legitimate need. I hear interesting things coming back, even from my 6 and 9-year-old granddaughters, about how schools are opening up their day with, at the elementary level, with something called WIN. So it's each kid basically says what I need. And it's a really positive social emotional learning tool that a kid has to articulate what they need that day and that moment to be successful. And those are tools, I think, that kind of can cross the spectrum. And I think those are the kinds of things you're talking about that are preventative in nature. So I'm very aware that there's a lot of efforts being made sort of in that first line of defense, which is where kids are showing up right now in school. You did make one comment about South Burlington being not as good as surrounding communities in terms of youth services. Can you expand on that a little bit?
That's a fair question. I don't have all my notes on that. And again, that was something that we heard multiple times from either the experts group or the stakeholders group, and so it was enough. They were often enough that we put it in our findings, but I don't have the details on that.
Yeah,
one.
and I think, I mean, to me, the continuum of looking at school, looking at the rec department, which is very active, and looking at scholarships that are provided. There's certainly a lot of gaps to fill, but my hope would be that as the work continues, it's articulated in a way that complements everything that's going on and is a value add to that, whatever
100%.
it might be. If it's a center, if it's a program, I was sorry to hear the mentoring program went away. I didn't
know.
realize that. I'm sure that was probably a victim of the pandemic, but that was a very successful program that really paired up individuals, adults and children.
No, absolutely. I mean, we've known this. I've been involved in mentoring programs for many years, and Vermont Mentor has lots of research that shows the value of one additional caring adult, even in a family that is in great shape. And I think a little bit about one of the comments or one of the questions that you, I think, asked Tim when you were responding is one thing we have to be careful of is, right, it's not the youth that are at risk to maybe go into crisis don't all look the same. Some are in houses that have plenty of money and have plenty of resources, and some are not. So it is not unique to any particular demographic of our youth. So that's why we keep saying it's a space for everybody, and finding a way to mentor each other and having caring adults in that space is what we are looking for.
You're touching on something I think that is at the end there is very important, is the stigma. I for the last 20 years, have taken care of my sister who has mental illness of a very serious nature. And what I've learned from that is, you're right, mental illness can affect people of all groups, all classes. But what I've seen around it is, if you don't have someone who has the time and the means to help you, the fall from grace is very fast and almost irreversible. And so I think creating a net that is broad and wide is very, very important. I think it's also very important is the stigma, because in even talking about it and trying to get my sister, it's hands off. And I think this is obviously one of the biggest challenges with youth. Is to what I hope you're looking to do is to try to create. It's one thing to say I have a safe place, but have the ability somehow to say it's okay to say that I'm
not
help.
Okay right now.
And that's where I think, as has been said here by a few of our colleagues, the seamless connection between the schools is going to be critical, because there's that open time after school. What happens? Some families, again, it comes down to have the good fortune to be around or to help someone else be around.
Yeah.
But there are many who are just basically left on their own. And don't have the ability to communicate in a way that says it's okay to mention problems.
Yeah.
So I think, from my just very narrow perspective, is addressing the stigma and creating the ability to step forward, because otherwise a lot of things happen. And I've just been seeing so many things, because once you deal with someone who's in a system, you through that meet so many other people in the system, and how quickly people can fall from grace.
Yeah, I agree with you, and not to oversimplify it, but if your leg was broken, you'd get some help. You'd go get some help, right? We need to change that dynamic so that if something doesn't feel right, it's okay to just go get some help.
I had a question. You had mentioned about you hadn't talked to students directly. I mean, this is from a survey, right?
Yeah.
And do you have a plan to actually get some students together and in a little round table and ask them what's going on?
Yeah. So to be again, I'm not casting any blame on anybody. So we tried hard to get some students to come to some of our meetings, and then we were able to. And I think there's a communication challenge that we maybe didn't communicate that offer authentically enough. And I think there was also some kind of gatekeeping, like, who are you guys, and do we want, are you worth having our kids spend time with you to talk about this? So I think we're gonna be patient. We're gonna, if we can get some momentum on this and it becomes like, oh, maybe this is something that's really there. I think we'll have students engage with us, and we've got great relationships with the school. As I said, I'm meeting with them next week. I've got a lot of connections within the school system as well as many of our other members. I'm not overly concerned about that. I think the challenge will be finding a way that their voice is authentically heard and acted upon, because they can smell the BS faster than anybody. And if they're just being used as a token, they should rightfully throw us out. And so we got to make sure it's very real.
I worry that in the last 10, 15 years, there's a caring deficit, right? And that's what's causing this tail off in an increase in depression, but it's a tail off in non-depressive feelings, right?
Yeah.
Where there and there's something that's missing, and maybe you're trying to zero in on that, right?
Yeah.
It's that there's something that's missing that was.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we don't have data from 100 years ago, 50 years ago, or maybe there is data. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think that
I think you're onto something, Tim. And I think the way I internalize that is, again, I'll use my own background, and we don't lead with our faith stuff that often, but it's authentically who we are, so we're not afraid of that either. But I grew up in an environment where I had a whole group of people that cared about me that were not my family. Right. And that happened to be my church. Well, that doesn't have to be a church. I'd love it to be a church, frankly, but it doesn't have to be. It can be any space. And as any community gets larger, right, a 20,000 person community is different than a 3,000 community. It's easy to lose track of the value of community caring against each other, right? And so I think we're trying to create a space that is 2024, but a little bit of that old, our neighbors and our friends all care for us. And if I was down on the streets on my bike in downtown St. Albans, not where I'm supposed to be, one of the people that lived there, hey, Patrick, they knew who I was and they told me to get where I belonged, right? So I think we just need to create an opportunity. And we saw this in spades with the food shelf, and we still see it. We're going to be open 5 years. And we have so many people in South Burlington that either contribute dollars or their time or food. And they do it joyfully. And I don't know what they were doing before. I'm sure they were doing good stuff. All we did was create the space for it to happen. And then people gravitated to help their neighbors. And I think at some level, this will be a similar dynamic. If we can get momentum on it, is people will gravitate to help each other. Because at the end of the day, again, from a faith perspective, everybody's a gift. And if we can see that gift in the other person, how can we not help them when they need help? It's that simple to us. How can we not help these students, these young people, when we know they're in need? It's just not an answer we're going to say, walk away from. We're going to do something.
Can I
Please.
come on the scale? So I think the council knows this. So this is why I work in local government, right? I started my career in foster care as a foster care caseworker in New York City, and I saw children who were really struggling and found municipal government as a way to create healthy communities where we can provide, good homes and good recreation options and good schools and good shared use paths and good parks for kids to come together and be stronger. Because we don't have that space in South Burlington, we have it at the schools for folks who are connected to, during those hours, connected to those services that the schools provide, and they're best in the state here in South Burlington. I don't want to minimize any of that. But because we don't have that, I can go there and there'll be something and there'll be a caring adult, we have turned those kids to their phones. We have said those are the spaces you can go to find camaraderie. I think one of the things that happens here, and Adam Math, our fantastic recreation directors in the room, and I think Alana would articulate the same thing, is that because we don't have that space, we are pulling, we are sometimes programming at the mall, we are sometimes programming at the school when we can get to it, we are sometimes programming in the library or other spaces or parks in the summer. But somebody has to know where to look to go find a program to maybe show up and maybe get served. There's not that organic, I can go to this space and there'll be caring adults there and there'll be something for me to do. And what we're really missing as a result of that is not only kind of catching some of those kids, but also the magic that happens when those kids come together with caring adults and learn from one another and take care of one another. And we just don't have the structure right now to provide that because we don't have a guaranteed place for somebody to go. Thanks for letting me say that.
Thank you, Jesse.
Oh, and I'm also sending you all the YRBS South Burlington specific data, the 2021 report, which is the most recent, and the historic one, which is up on the VDH website.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jesse.
My recollection is that every 2 years that happens, Patrick?
I think it is, but I think it got delayed the last time, or the data's not out yet. I
Well,
don't
even the
I don't know.
results will be delayed too. Yeah.
So what's
Yes,
your,
every odd year. Sorry.
remind me, what's your next step? What's the next thing you're going to do?
So we're probably, the best way to describe what we're doing now is socializing what we see as call to action. So we're going to be meeting with the school district. I think it's next week. And then I'm going to ask the South Burlington Business Association if they would take invite us to one of their meetings so we can share with that community. And then I think we're going to kind of take the temperature of everybody and say, is there enough interest from all the parties that we think are material to doing something like this to move forward? And if so, then, we'll figure out how to bring those various groups together and say, are we going to do this? Can we do it? Let's go.
Okay. Any other comments by councilors?
I just want to thank you so much for doing this work. And I think a lot of our kids are really missing a lack of purpose in their lives. Why am I here? There's no service. And we talk about service for the kids, but I think that service from the kids in community is really important so they have a sense of empowerment and self-worth. And I really applaud you doing this work. So thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate your kind words, and I would say that if we're able to have this conversation again, I hope to have a number of youth here to say exactly what they think about all of this as well, because that's what really matters.
And congratulations on your new van.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Rotary. Very generous. Thank you all.
Thank you. All right, move it.
Ryan Doyle has.
Is there a comment from somebody online?
Yeah, Ryan here. Really nice to hear Patrick speaking, and for Jesse to follow up on that. There are a lot of issues at play here, and isolation is a really big one of them. I do work in the schools, and it's a pretty well-known phenomenon that people are more lonely now, even though we have more technology. And this is of people of all age. But every decision we make as a municipality can affect that. Right now, we have an active transportation plan that's going to be reported on soon. And then we're going to have a parks and open space plan. And municipal government is really where the infrastructure of everyday life gets created. And if children are limited by where they can go and who they can see by the need to be driven places, then they really can't be normal kids. And what you'd see in the school is that there are a lot of students who have overscheduled lives where everything has to be scheduled. And then if they do want to see other friends, they have to rely on their phone to talk, FaceTime, but not interact in person. And then at the other extreme, there are a lot of students who don't have any scheduling of activities and don't really have a place to go after school. And finding more casual spaces, or rather creating more casual spaces like parks and safe connections and places where the general public is outside in public, a lot can be really helpful. Like Patrick, I grew up in St. Albans, and we had a youth center there for a long time, and the recreation department was in a different building than City Hall. And so there were places where there were parks around, but then also staff people in case things got a little bit noisy or out of hand, but didn't really require a police presence, for example. And so there's a lot of ways to start thinking about how these get structured, even without going into building a new space, although I hope that enough partners come together that can be something in the future. But there's a lot of little spaces that we can create if we really work hard at these next few couple of plans.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm smelling smoke. Is anybody else smelling smoke? Yes. I think there's a fire pit going on over there. Probably is what happens. Okay, moving on to item number 8, which is receive a presentation from.
Sorry.
Oh, good.
Hey, Patrick, before you pack up your computer, can you stop sharing your screen? don't think I can force you to do that. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. It's okay.
That
I
worked.
noticed
Good.
that too.
Thank you.
There we go. So receive a presentation from Wagner Hodgson on the City Green concepts as defined by the community consultants and discuss next steps. Here is Alana Blanchard, Community Development Director, and Wagner Hodgson. Hodgson? Yep. Thank you, sorry.
Amy, I made you the presenter. Are you gonna?
So good evening. For the record, Alana Blanchard, and thank you for having us here. So I wanted to introduce Jeff Hodgson and Amy Houghton from Wagner Hodgson, and they've been working on developing a concept for City Green and developing recommendations regarding that City Green, specifically the program and the locations that it could be. This work has taken place with the community over 2 meetings, as well as with a survey. And I think you're all very familiar with the project, but just for the public, there has been a village green included in various concept plans for City Center for quite some time. And this project was funded as a feasibility study last year. And we did modify the name because we are not a village, so it's a city green. And I'd like to let Amy take it away. And but before she does, just wanted to let you know that this is really your presentation from Wagner Hodgson. So this is your time to talk to them and learn about the program and the recommendation, any questions you have about the process. So this is the main time that you'll have with them. So this would conclude their contract with the city. And that, I guess the other thing to say is that the design is a concept and not an actual construction design.
All right. Good to meet you and see you. I know a few of you. Just moving forward, I think as this is the culmination of 2 public presentations, I think you've probably seen some of them throughout. So I'll probably be going quickly through some of this presentation. I just wanted pretty much to show the process and how we got to where we were in our final recommendations. So this was a feasibility study to explore the viability, can you hear me, of a potential city green in the heart of downtown South Burlington. Really the goal was to identify the preferred potential locations to accommodate the residents and visitors in cities' needs, as well as develop conceptual park designs and recommendations that you guys can move forward with developing a park. Ultimately, that process involved researching city centers and city greens, identifying potential locations within the downtown here, define what makes a great public space, identify common uses and activities that would occur in these greens, as well as gather public input. We had 2 meetings, as well as an online questionnaire through the city. So we got a lot of feedback, which was great. Also, then we took a lot of that feedback and analyzed the sites and looked at that public feedback, as well as drew on those criteria that create a great space, and as well as looked at the program fit accommodation. So the uses that we felt were good for the park and that the people in the city wanted, or residents, we tested them against the site size and such. And then ultimately developing that conceptual plan or plans and those recommendations. So that's really the process I'm going to go through now. And so always knowing that we are in the downtown, and that is a form-based code. So thinking of greens with the that context of the city center and what kind of development will be occurring around them. Historically, parks were common green space for small agricultural areas, and so they've evolved and slowly have become these more flexible green spaces where social gatherings occurred, but also as time carried on, they integrated fountains and memorials and bandstands and monuments, and really to serve the public. So and as in Vermont, village greens and town greens really were the beginning of those where they served the historic and physical, they were the cultural heart of these towns, and they really provided a lot of spaces for festivals and markets and fairs and places where people gathered and exercised, as you see, here. And these are some examples of those places within Vermont. And so as time went on, though, again, as civic issues became more important to towns, they evolved to, town squares. And so like City Hall Park. So there's the civic building associated to these parks. So they slowly have evolved. And to today, because real estate is so tight in urban areas and there's a lot more mixed use going on, you're finding these private-public partnerships that, it's a lot of P's in there, but they're becoming these very highly programmed spaces to meet the needs of the community as well as public needs for the cities. And so also, but they're also getting much smaller because of that real estate pressure and costs. So
and also just due to limited funding and these partnerships have helped both the public and the private sectors in creating the spaces that they want to see.
Yeah. So let's see, moving forward. So thinking of that, let me just make sure I
think you skipped one.
Did I?
Yep.
Okay. So it's a little lagged. So these are 6 spaces in downtown here that we've identified. And so I'll go into them a little bit further, but just so you understand the map, this is downtown and where those all, we're obviously at City Hall where there's a little bit of yellow right across from number 4, but you can see they're all sort of in this general area. So really in thinking what makes a great space, thinking of access and connectivity to that space and within that space. Also looking at, is it a comfortable place to be? Is it good visibility? Is it safe? Thinking of the social qualities of these spaces, as well as the uses and activities that occur in these places. And really, we find that those activities are the backbone of these spaces. So what we wanted, we looked at these different categories and what we wanted to really understand or what activities occurred in these spaces. We looked at a bunch of different parks. And what we found is that a lot of them had these flexible green spaces that really allowed for a bunch of different uses. And these are a bunch of different parks sort of in New England and down a little further, but really just trying to pull from a bunch of different precedents.
Yeah,
So,
and you can also see that, if you go back, the 2 images on the lower right, are the same view, just different times of year.
yeah, that's a
So
good idea. So if you have questions, just let me know. I was just going to go through these fairly quickly, but really letting you know what sort of the uses and activity categories we looked at and just different variety of seating, formal, informal, movable, playful. So just thinking about how different people use these spaces and accommodating people of all different abilities. Looking at walkways and shared youth paths, making sure that there's this idea of a shared use for vehicles as well as pedestrians, these small intimate paths, paths with seat walls, also pathways that, as you can see in the bottom, that Pentagon, that gets covered over with an ice rink later on. So just thinking of these flexible paths and open space that, as this evolves. Obviously thinking of bikes as well, really the connections to that place. Social gathering, as our last speaker, really finding places where people can gather and be with one another in public. And so looking at a variety of different sizes and formalities and seating conditions and shade and lighting. So thinking of all these different things. And so what we did is we had, and I'll continue these different types of activities and uses, but we put these all on a board and people voted on them. So, but also looking at arts and culture and how can we have people integrate into that within the park and be part of those. And these are just different examples looking at interactive fountains, which seems to be a very popular things for children, and it attracts people of all ages actually to watch and participate. But the ideas of fountains and games and, you know, really get everyone involved in a playful way. Looking at structures, whether it's shade structures or tents, you know, spaces that would allow for a tent, like at City Hall Park. These kiosks, these food kiosks, or just, you know, bandstands, looking at these different structures that were within the park that can house activities and that are also flexible. And then really this integration, probably this, you know, public-private partnership is really about this integration of the retail and dining with the residential above. And as you can see, a lot of these spaces have that, and it seems to really activate and provide users for the park. And then ultimately, as you know, in Vermont, we have lots of events and festivals, and that really is where people can come and be together and experience a lot of different things, whether it's a Friday night movie screen or a farmer's market. It's really, I feel like, what Vermont is about. Stormwater, being able to treat a lot of our stormwater, whether it's in rain gardens or thinking of pollinator gardens, but thinking of other landscape elements besides just human, but also supplying like storm water needs for like the city, using functional things that the city needs in these parks as well. So. And then just something we gave off to, it was a questionnaire we gave, and people gave us feedback on, you know, different ideas about the park and what they thought they would like in it and what they want to do in it. So really, there was about 20 people at that first event. We had these boards up there, and we asked them to give us a, you know, a like, a maybe, or a dislike. And so we looked at all this information, and really what we determined is that a lot of it was not conclusive, but it was indicative of certain preferences that people liked. And I've put a lot of these boards to the back if we ever wanted to get into them, but really interpreting them was very interesting. And really what we found that really people liked was this list of different uses and activities, and really looking at open space as informal play and a place that maybe could be converted into an ice rink in the winter. This idea of social gathering space with light that was flexible with its seating. Also a variety of different types of seating, picnic tables, seat walls, you know, movable tables and chairs, and thinking of walks and shared use paths. They really like this central idea, as well as a promenade with a shade structure. So there's all these different elements that I could go through them all. I probably don't need to, but we've incorporated all these uses into, and looked at these uses into all the different sites that were looked at. And some additional elements like kiosks, like a food kiosk, as well as, you know, shade trees and natural areas, community gathering spaces. And also it was very important as space for children and teens, and really a place for creative play. So, and I just piggybacking to the last person, I think this is a potential great space for people to meet as well. So again, looking at those 6 different spaces, I just wanted you to know what they were. And so obviously number 1 is in the U Mall, 2 is in the Blue Mall along Dorset Street. 3 and 4, they're sort of near City Hall and north of the Blue Mall. There's number 5 is where the public parking car garage is next to the DMV. And then as well, 6 is just north of Barnes and Noble. So looking at these, you know, 6 different spaces, we wanted to look at what really makes a great place. And we looked at those different categories to try to analyze those 6 different spaces to get down to what the preferred options that we think are best. And so I described these earlier. We didn't really look at the sociability aspect of it because that's something that will come in with design, that you sort of set that forth. And we looked at affordability as well. So we ended up doing this matrix of criteria. It's very complex and you can look through it if you want, but ideally taking away is the green is good, yellow is maybe, and the red is bad. And so what we determined, there were certain elements like surrounding environment that we felt, the red, that basically made a site not developable, we felt. And so like along, so that number 4, number 2 and 6 were right along, there's a plan right along Dorset Street. We felt it was loud and busy and that you would constantly be putting money towards mitigating that. So we felt there was a better use of looking at other sites that didn't have that element. We just felt that it would negate those sites. And then another thing that we looked at was looking at how the program fit within the space. And so we looked at different parks, again, that we looked at, and we gave a certain size to the program element. As you can see, these were the 4 major elements. So flexible green space, you needed about 1/3 of an acre. Ice rink, you needed that dimension, as well as the interactive fountain. So we took these different program elements and gave an actual area and put them into the park so you could see how they could potentially lay out. And that 3rd site really was too narrow if you also wanted to get a landscape within there, trees and such like that. So we felt that was not appropriate as a potential site.
Yeah, and these weren't really meant to be designs as much as, what can it fit?
Right.
So
really it's a feasibility for you guys to take these designs further, that we're recommending sites that we think would be a good place for a potential park, which will be designed in the future. So you can see we did all these different criteria, and the highest scoring ones were number 1 and 4. And so we moved those forward because we felt those were the most probable. And so those were those 2 sites, as you could see. And from there, we wanted to do a quick conceptual plan of how these could lay out based on the program that we were given. This is the site at the U Mall, and ideally, this is just put, as you can see, Kohl's is to the left. As you can see, it's this idea of mixing commercial and retail, those new buildings, with a park space. And this would be, as we said, this would probably be done with a developer because you would need to do more than just the park. You'd have to have other program elements associated to that. But really, this park, looks at pedestrian-oriented streets. It looks at tree-lined streets. It looks at providing pedestrian walks at the perimeters and connections to the mall and to shared use paths and things like that. It also, let's see, moving forward, it also, thinking of uses and activities, it has a coffee kiosk in the upper corner, and with a fountain. I guess I have my cursor here, with a fountain and seating associated to that. There's also a picnic grove in that area with children's play area. And as you come further south, there's the flexible lawn. That dashed area is actually a potential seasonal ice rink. And then a terrace area where there could be a covered structure for a performance space. And then moving further south, just carrying and having these connections over to Dorset Street and to the multi-use paths that are over on that street. But really thinking of retail, commercial below, and housing above. And this is just how this space could be laid out. Then looking at site 4, similar elements. But in this one, we wanted and I guess what we found in many of the sites is that kiosks played a critical role in keeping eyes on the park. So that's why a lot of these include these smaller kiosks and they're usually associated to these fountains, which we found have worked well. So I don't know if you can see in this area, there's the kiosk with the fountain adjacent. There's pathways connecting back to the city hall and to the existing building that is there now. This is a parking lot that's associated to that building, although we wanted to maintain the street in front of it because it needs an address in order to function, and also having parking on most of the sides of the park to have access to the park. There's also a future street that was proposed in the master plan for the city. So thinking about that, how that integrates into that. And then again, taking advantage of Market Street as a pedestrian-oriented street, so that can be closed down during different events and times of year like you do now. Just getting a little more detailed from a use standpoint, I think I did mention the kiosk and interactive play. The interactive play fountain, and then also the creative play just to the south of the kiosk, and then the flexible lawn with a potential ice skating rink and a stage just to the north of that, with a potential building, or like with City Hall, they don't actually have a structure there, but they do have a place where you can tie down tents and have structures like that.
And then also incorporating the infrastructure needed for festivals and performances into the ground, so that it's not kind of hard to host something.
Yeah, that's important. And this is just sort of a conceptual idea of how that could look. Can you talk about the what?
The terracing.
The terracing.
The terrace. If you back up, just how you have terraces and steps.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Sorry. So this is an upper terrace at this corner, and it would ramp down, and you'd have a series of steps, these gray, that would be seating steps that would actually, I guess, oversee the children's play area. But then also would slope down, at a 5%, so there would be good access down to the lower field. And then this terrace would be more linked, to the existing sidewalk that's here. So, we did not have grading plans of this, but conceptually, looking at the sites, this is something we can do. So, and these are just some of the precedents of the program that we just saw that we mentioned in the designs, but really, again, this is, emphasizing that flexible open space, that commercial and residential above, this idea of the kiosk and seating steps, just sort of a feeling. These were the images that the public liked, so we wanted to just keep those ideas.
I think there's more and more pressure on city greens to become multi-purpose, and historically there were a lot of fixed features, and we've kind of moved away from that to where, a fountain, interactive fountain, can be turned off and it can be a plaza when it's, not needed. So just being able to fit more into a limited space.
Right. And so all that was presented to the public, and the majority of this is the feedback we got from them, that the majority did prefer option 4. They thought maybe the site 3 could be linked to that, but that's another issue. But it would make the park larger. There was definitely comments and concerns and needs for children's play area. So that's been integrated. Also, public restrooms, which we feel could be integrated into the kiosk, could be at City Hall if this site was chosen. There's other ways of dealing with that, and we felt that wasn't important in locating, picking a location. Accessibility obviously will be addressed in any design that is done. And then really existing traffic congestion in this area. So we felt that was a larger issue that the town will have to deal with. And also, there was some concern that they didn't want too much stuff in the park, that they did want to keep it just trees and lawn and just green and landscapes and some paths and benches. So there's more of a simplified version. A few people wanted that. And then also for the public, the website, the information we got off the website, as you can see, these different graphs. We got 28 responses, which was great. And 64% liked the idea of a park. 43 being the highly programmed that we had suggested, and 21 maybe preferring a little less programmed in the park. But all in all, people really enjoyed it. You know, other people also felt they wanted to deal with parking was a major concern, especially if number 4 was developed.
Yeah.
So a larger parking, I guess, scheme is needed to look at the whole area anyway, as well as general park safety and maintenance was a concern from the public, and accessibility was crucial, especially they wanted a focus on playgrounds. So,
Yeah, and
and
there's definitely a lot of underutilized parking in the city center. But, you know, the lot number 4 is everybody's favorite parking spot. So there
because
were some
it's
people
probably
that-
right next to City
It's
Hall.
right in the middle, yeah. But which is also what makes it a great spot for a park. So
But if you look in the, I guess in the appendix, there is a diagram showing parking and how distributed it is. It's just people, I probably just don't know. So, but I think a bigger idea needs to be looked at for parking anyway. And then, you know, some people didn't want the park. They felt like they didn't need another green space and that maintaining the existing parks would be better source, you know, using your money that way. So, but that was very few people who mentioned that. So conceptually, at the end, you know, our site designs really did not change that much. There were smaller elements that we felt we could integrate into the current program that we had. But if you do want to look at these two sites in comparison, you know, Site 1 is a little larger than Site 2, about 0.5 acres more. And then they both have similar kiosks. The green space is obviously slightly larger on Site 1, as well as the hardscape. But all in all, percentage-wise, they're pretty similar. And if you look at the green space, hardscape, and circulation, and both of them have enough space to accommodate the program that is desired.
well, and Site 1, you know, can be modified according to whatever redevelopment happens. So it could get larger, it could get smaller.
True.
Whereas Site number 4 is kind of finite. So
That is true. And also just to note that that ice rink is considered part of that green space. So it would go away in the summer to have the green space, and then in the winter it would become an ice rink.
Does the black dash line signify the actual area?
The
measured
zone,
area?
yep, that's the
The
area,
size,
the
yeah.
size, that 50 by, I think, 145 that we recommended. And these are our recommendations, really looking at both those sites because they scored well on the matrix and they were suitable to meet the uses that were identified by the public and by us. You know, looking at Site 1, really developing that in conjunction with a larger mixed-use development, including that retail, restaurant, and residential above. The final location for Site 1 can also be flexible because the UMall parking lot is very large. So depending on what the program is, it could move within that zone. So just to note that. Also, Site 4 could be developed solely on its own because there's compatible program needs all around it. So you wouldn't have to potentially do a public-private partnership. You could, but there's just a lot more program already there to support it. Any development for Site 4 should consider that future planned road location, just so you're aware of that. Then obviously parking and traffic issues should be considered as a separate, you know, it's an external factor and should be addressed separately. It is a larger issue for the city. Also, all future designs should include site lighting and signage to improve the overall safety and visibility of and accessibility of that site. And ultimately, this is a list of different programs that we've incorporated to both sites that we would recommend. And as you can see, several of them, they could be phased in. Say if you didn't want to do a food kiosk right now from funding, you could phase that in later on. So you can just see there's a few things that you could do it that way. But all in all, we also need to accommodate pets. I didn't mention that earlier, but that was a big desire for some of the public as well. But these are all the program elements moving forward. And I guess looking from a cost standpoint, these are two projects that we've worked on in the past, and just the range. This is sort of the low range, the Middlebury Park, and the high range of City Hall Park of 0.9 to 3.8. And so we felt that our park here would come into, between 1.6 and 3.7, depending on how much program was associated to that park. So it sort of comes in between those other two parks that we
That's
did.
the development cost?
That's the development cost per.
That does not include land acquisition.
No,
it does
sorry,
not. You're
just
Excludes land
improvements.
cost,
Yeah.
road, additional, adjacent roadways and other neighboring improvements, so. That's good. So that is the project.
It's a lot of information.
It is a
thrown
lot
at
of
you.
information. But questions?
Well, thanks for that work, right? So that was good engagement with the community and produced a lot of opinions, and then the analysis narrowed it down to just the two best locations. So I think that's a logical, choice. So I'll open it up to the council for discussion.
Do you think Site 4 is big enough for what we're hoping to accomplish?
I think so.
I think it is too.
Yeah.
As if you see in this, I was going to say deck, there's a lot of different parks that we looked at that were like half an acre, that were accommodating the public's needs. It's just really, the space needs to be flexible and it needs to be accommodating. I mean, if you didn't feel that Site 4 was enough, maybe you could take 3 and add it to it. But I do think
Or maybe a piece of 3, maybe just like.
the only thing is, I think if you did join 3, you'd really have to think of how it programmally worked with 4, because that future road, if that future road is intended to go through there, I mean, you don't have to build it. It is in your master plan, but if that road wasn't there, then it would adjoin that and it maybe would work better. But now we think that road is going in, so it could be reserved as parking perhaps for the park. I don't know.
In terms of Site 1, I guess I just intuitively to me, because it's across 4 lanes, it just seems like we would need a whole lot to develop around it.
Yes.
To make it as functional as Site 4. Do you see it the same way?
I think that, I think Site 1 to be successful in the near future would need a lot more happening around it.
I think
So
you
it
really
wouldn't-
need a partner
Yeah.
who's
Yeah.
going to come in and wants to develop it and get all that other housing associated to it and retail.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
So
for it to work. But I think with the correct person or
Yeah.
partnership, I think it would be great.
Yeah.
But by definition, that means one's development is very much conditioned upon when the owner of that property wanted it to start there. So our timing would be very much tied to there, where the 4
Yeah.
is timing
4
that
is
we
ready
control.
to kind of.
We don't control that.
No, we don't
No.
control, but in terms of the property purchase, that would require a property purchase. I mean, require property purchase. The question is in terms of, even if the one happens, let's say tomorrow we get a breaking news, Burlington Press, they're developing the mall, they're going to do. In terms of a city center, we have, as you say, some of the elements of the city center here that we're sitting in right now.
Yeah.
As Andrew said, there is this 4-lane road that you cross if you go to the city park. One of the things we heard from Tacoma Park when we talked about their experience in Maryland, Tacoma Park City Center, was, the fact that you have green space, you have eateries close to it, you have everything very central, and you actually have public access. Because, another way, as you said, in managing the access is about emphasizing bike paths and public transit as a way to sort of bring people together. But if we did one and kept the city center, you don't think there'd be a feeling of 2 centers or 2 different disconnections?
I don't think so, because I think 4 has such a civic identity that it feels very different from Site 1 to me. So I think, ultimately.
One is a civic, city hall, library, and then another one which is but then it seems like a shame in terms of that we emphasize the first floor retail here, with the hopes that it would also be like a go-to dining area. And one of the things, again, we heard from Tacoma was to have the dining area go to work, you also have to have a meeting place. And this clearly is, number 4 is sort of like that meeting place.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Very good work. Thanks for all.
Sure.
As you're looking so far and wide, for examples on the ice skate, not only in Pentagon City, but in Southeast Washington, they have the same thing. And in
Washington, Northern Virginia can, we have the snow and ice. We should-
Yeah.
I lean largely towards for a city center park. I think that the work that's been done on Marketplace and with City Hall, et cetera, beckons that to be there. I think with the future redevelopment of the University Mall, there could easily be a public-private space
Oh, yeah.
there as well. And
Yep.
when the core city center on Marketplace expands and grows, having two public spaces in this area, I think, could be really, really viable.
Yeah. I totally agree.
And provided there were a land acquisition or a land lease or whatever the deal was, it seems development of lot 4 or choice 4 could be on a more accelerated timeline than number 1. So those are my thoughts for now.
I had a question. Can you clarify why space 5 was not as desirable? Because it does have that proximity to city center, and it's slightly larger than 4. Why did it not make the cut?
I guess it seems that there's that parking structure from, as you can see on here, just looking at just tallying up the different scores, it did score 1 less than the other. Maybe if there was more funding associated to it, it could be a potential park, but there is the structure there that needs to be demolished, the parking structure. And so we felt that there was it just didn't meet the same category level as the other two. So, but I mean, I don't know how you feel. I think, again, if money was an issue and you could get rid of that structure easily, that could potentially be an option. But I still think that 4 is stronger, and that 5 onto the north seems a little more restricted with the development over here. There's also this area over here. It doesn't have as much front-facing retail on it, just the DMV really, and it's pinned.
I think Site 4 also had, circulation all the way around it, which was easy to kind of accommodate and would lend itself maybe to a kind of a safer, more welcoming place.
This just strikes me as 4. I think 4 is a great location for. I know how I've been thinking about City Green, the thing, but the way it was drawn in the concept, it almost feels like it's a city-sponsored entree to the building that's on this small slice of the pie. Just an observation.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important to have that street in front of the commercial, dividing it from. So right there. I think, if the park just went right up to the building, it would feel a little different to me.
Jesse, did you want to say something?
I just want to remind the council that you do have an executive session warned for this tonight, and that these would all require real estate purchases, and you are right now negotiating against yourselves.
And to point out that this is not eligible for TIF funding because we're done with TIF funding, right? Yeah, just another observation.
So to me, if you have other questions or comments for the consultants about what they saw or what they heard or other things you should be thinking about as you consider, a bond vote, now's your time to ask those questions.
I've got one other. I'm always, interested in the amount of community feedback. So it did not seem like there was a real, grand exposure to the community. And I don't know if all the community members were unique community members, but was the ballpark between online and the 2 meetings maybe 40?
There was 20 per meeting for those two meetings, and then there was 28 responses, so that's 68 responses.
And those are all unique community members.
I don't know if they're all unique. There may
yeah.
have been doubled up. I think there was
I
some
was a
doubling
repeat.
up. But actually, all those 28 responses, they said that most of them had not attended the meetings,
The online, yeah.
the online, yeah.
Yeah, well, either way, even if they were all unique, that is a small slice of the
Yeah.
community. So,
It
but
is a
I
small-
also
yeah.
think a lot of the community appreciates taking it to the next level with a concept to react to. So I do
Yeah.
expect there would be fine tuning that may go on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And these sessions were on really beautiful summer days. It's hard to pull people in.
Another question, if I can. I mean, one of the things for the city center, whether it's a 1 or 4 or even 5, is to bring people from this, as we heard our last speaker say, this large city of 20,000 together. I mean, that's one of the key points. Any thoughts on, you said, yes, you have to think about parking, transportation, but do you have any thoughts on how you bring people in to this area, and that you want to make it as inviting as possible?
Yeah.
How strong a factor is that in deciding ultimately whether it's 1, 4, or 5?
I think it's important that the park space be programmed, that there's things that happen that people can hear about and attend. I know with, City Hall Park in Burlington, we were lucky to have Burlington City Arts, which kind of pretty much programs the park all weekends and many weeknights. So there's always something going on. I don't think the location is as critical, between 1 and 4. I think they both would potentially attract people equally, I would think. So, I mean, 4 is closer to the school, and the library, but I think in the big picture, long term, I think they could both be successful.
But I do think if we're trying to develop the downtown the way you want to, there's going to be a lot of people that are just going to be walking to this space.
Yeah.
And so it really needs to serve those local people too. And as they said, there's not many places for children to play right in the downtown area. Or I think thinking about animals, I mean, a lot of people have pets. How are we going to deal with
A
that?
lot of people
Yeah.
wanted a dog park.
Yeah. And there was program elements like they want a pool, but
Yeah.
that just isn't appropriate for a city center park.
That was another big topic, was outdoor pool.
Got a pond.
So, just a curiosity, you said in your summary it should contain an ice rink. Can you just spend 30 seconds, a minute on why you feel strongly about that?
I think it was more, thinking of year-round things to bring people to the space. So there's plenty of things for summer, spring, and fall. It's just, there can be other things programmatically in the park in the winter, but that just seemed like something that would bring people together.
And a lot of people commented.
And a lot of people commented on.
There's probably a fair amount of infrastructure to be built for that.
Not if you're just flooding the field and putting up barriers.
Oh, and waiting for the weather, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
There's weather
Yeah.
dependent, and then there's the bigger commitment of refrigeration and Zambonis and things.
And even as I said in D.C., both not only in Arlington but in Washington D.C. in the southeast, they have the flooded kind.
Yep.
And
They must have refrigeration.
They must have.
They must have refrigeration in DC.
Although
But refrigeration can be removable. It can be done.
It is, and in the summer you come out there
System.
in Washington, it turns into a cafe because it's all cement.
Yeah.
The rings, and then
And they also have those synthetic ones that are like plastic cutting boards that you skate on. If you haven't seen those before.
So I know that your contract on this has ended with this presentation. I would still, as we move forward, really like to see what a programming concept would look like that included 3 and 4. Programmatically, just to see how that would change, improve, augment, or be a detriment to what we're looking at. So, but thank you for the work you did.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
So if that's all the comments from the council, we are going to talk about this in executive session later, and we need to take a break. because we have another item to get to before we get to the Liquor Control Commission, which is our favorite item of the night. So thank you very much for everything. Appreciate it. Any brief comments from the online? Ryan, make it brief, please, because we're already, we need a break here.
Yeah. So there's a few things here that I haven't heard mentioned in higher specifics. One is that if you look at a lot of parks in Montreal, they actually do have restaurants facing the park. I don't think a road between the park and a restaurant is actually necessary, as long as there's enough paver surface that people using mobility devices can have plenty of space to get up to it and that it feels welcoming. The other thing is it might be the case that those buildings are owned by the City of Montreal as well. I don't know that for specifics. I do know that Montreal does have hundreds of ice rinks that they maintain in the winter. Only a few of them are refrigerated. And there's, I think, a value in refrigeration based on how the last few winters have gone with the rest of their parks and the very poor conditions of the inconsistent winters we've been having. The other thing I'd like you to think about is the use of large-scale underground stormwater storage. If you are investing in something like a plaza or a place where there could be an ice rink, especially if you have some gradation to the site, that is a very good opportunity to put underground storage such that it would free up more surface storage. As you know, right now, city center is like a third stormwater retention and a third parking lot. That's a pretty bad ratio for a city center. You really shouldn't have any stormwater retention on the surface in a city center. So anything you can do to incorporate that underground in a park expansion would be great. I wouldn't be offended at all if the city wanted to buy that whole pie-shaped lot and make a park out of it. But hopefully it's done in the next 10 years. So I'll give it that, and I'll send the rest of my comments by email. Thanks.
Thank you, Ryan. So thank you very much. Do we get to keep the presentation as part of the fee? So we get to keep the PowerPoint? Yeah, okay, good. Whew. So we need that for...
It is in your packet.
Oh, right. Oh, we don't have to give it back. Okay, good. Great. Thank you. All right, so thank you very much. And we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll be back in 5. Thanks very much. Okay, we're back to receive a presentation, item number 9, on the equity and planning efforts and discuss next steps with Kelsey Peterson, Senior City Planner, and Andy Brumbach, Communications and Outreach Manager. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for having us today. So this is a project that you have seen before. It's funded by municipal planning grant money from the state. So it's centered in planning, but the idea is that it is much more far-reaching, and I'll get into explaining that more as we get through. The core of the project is an equity in planning outreach toolkit. We've identified, as much of the country and the world has identified, that there have been shortfalls. There have been sort of missing communities. There have been underrepresented people who haven't been able to, either haven't been able to, or haven't been motivated to, or haven't had an easy enough path to be able to participate in municipal government and all the way up through the federal government. Okay, so wanting to talk through at the very highest level, what are the project goals here? Number 1 is advancing equity in city government, which is one of the key principles of City Plan 2024. And through that, reframing the city's approach to outreach by giving all people equivalent value and avoiding valuing some input types, timings, or voices over others. Naturally speaking, there's a recency bias when you go through a process that's a year long, and then you have the last couple of meetings, that's the freshest in your mind, that's the thing that you hear most, or a frequency bias. Maybe the same person has showed up to every meeting or responded to every survey, and so you hear that thing every single time. So you may consciously or unconsciously think, oh, that's a valuable voice, without understanding that you have that frequency bias. And part of this is building a predictable, transparent system. What we've been doing in South Burlington, by nobody's fault, is doing the best we can, which often means what do we have for funding for a given project? What is the timeline for a given project? How nimble are we having to be in a given project? In what results is best efforts that fall a little short. And it's something that the members of the public maybe don't have as predictable an understanding of the system, where they know if I look at this website on this day, I'll find out about something. If I read the city news through an e-newsletter, I'll find out about something. It'll be posted at my school. It'll be posted in lawn signs. Like, having some predictable system instead of ad hoc, what different departments are doing at different times, adds to the transparency and the equity in your outreach system. And the idea is, the goal is to reach people that traditional outreach often fails to reach. Traditional public outreach in many cases in municipal government and many types of government is a weeknight meeting. Weeknight meetings are accessible to some people for many reasons: time, money, childcare, shift work, all sorts of things. But only having outreach that has one structure and is this traditional structure only reaches the people who are able to participate. And then finally, to incorporate a feedback loop into outreach. We've heard this a bit in the past, but it's something that's become more prominent recently, that even if we do the best job we can with outreach and sending out information and getting feedback from the public, we don't always close the loop on how does the city council make decisions on how do you process that input? How does the planning commission take the ideas that people had and respond to them, or send out, like, here's when the final meeting is, or here's the draft, can you give us further feedback? It doesn't often connect all the way around. So those are the big high-level goals for this project. And the really big picture is this sort of upside down pyramid thing that I had to fit all my text into, so it's a little funny shape. It's building the structures that go from where this project is in the kind of brown color, the equity in planning outreach, so more tightly to planning and more tightly to just the outreach process, and building the structures that move from that as a small piece into the bigger pieces of an equitable approach to city decision making, and then that moves up to just further equity generally in city government. And this is where the city council really plays into this, is the planning commission is where this project lives now, but the idea is that this is the seed, this is the place where we start and we build the toolkit, that then it's taken by other entities in the city and it's ingrained in how city decision making is done, that then it comes up to city council and you all use it in your decision-making processes, and it kind of moves up the chain where everybody in the city is feeling like they're more informed, like they have more ability to participate and give feedback, and they feel that their feedback has been appreciated and the time they've spent and the money or the effort that they've made to give that feedback has been appreciated by the city and at least digested. It's not saying anybody has to implement and agree with everything that someone says. That's not possible with a community of 20,000 people or any size community, honestly. But to make people understand that what they're saying is valuable, and then if they feel that what they said in one situation is valuable, they're going to be more likely to participate in another context. So just kind of going from the beginning to where we are now, building the toolkit is where we're starting. We started this process in the mid-winter to early spring and set up these 6 different things for public input in how to draft the toolkit. The idea is that the toolkit in the end will be a document, but a living document that has a series of pieces to it that enable the Department of Public Works, the Planning Department, Ilana, when she's doing community development, to utilize the toolkit and apply it to their different needs. And it creates outreach that is scalable and that is targeted to the specific communities of people that are most impacted, and takes into account that some public outreach is effective when it's this big, and some projects it needs to be this big, and helps the city make decisions about scaling resources. So these are the 6 things that we worked with Civic Brand, our consultant, to develop as public input in the first iteration of drafting. The community advisory group we set up as a series of, I think it's 7 or 8, it's 8 people who come from different facets of the community and have connections to different groups within the community. So it clearly does not represent, 8 people can't represent 20,000. But it's people who are community builders, people who know people who are networkers, and people who have the ability to reflect some of the needs of other communities without representing those communities necessarily. So those are people who came from religious communities, representatives for underhoused and low-income housing, nonprofits, some just community movers and shakers. Its staff was involved, and we had meetings involving our consultants. They have provided feedback iteratively along the way with all of these other items, and then as drafts have been moving forward into the rough drafting stage. So the others, the public survey and the pop-up events, those 2 middle ones, are kind of open options. They were posted, the public survey was open to anyone. It was publicized through our channels. We had signs, there are signs in City Hall about with a QR code, about how to respond to that survey. And pop-up events occurred when Civic Brand came to South Burlington and went to a park when Rec was having another event, and whoever was attending that event had the opportunity to talk to Civic Brand. The lightest blue is the staff input. That is both talking directly with staff in City Hall about these projects. That includes our other non-City Hall departments like police in particular. I'm not sure if they talked to fire. I think they did. I'm not sure. But so talking to people who both have the staff perspective and have perspective on communities that they interact with that maybe the planning and zoning department doesn't interact with. So, and the library in particular, they gave us further contact information of people to include for one-on-one interviews and focus groups that Civic Brand then talked to the people that were recommended by staff and by members of the community advisory group to try to reach those fingers out a little bit further in developing this tool. I think it has been recently closed as of early October. So here is the really high-level toolkit framework. Principles, guidelines, and best practices, engagement types, community partners, and checklist templates and other resources. And I promise I'll talk through these things because they are a little, policy wonk and hard to think about not in context. The principles, guidelines, and best practices is what Civic Brand has been pulling from their research about other communities, about what policy scientists and sociologists and social workers and other researchers in the field have been developing as best practices and outreach, and pulling that in to help build this framework for South Burlington in a context that is right-sized for this community. Engagement types I'll talk about in a second in a little more depth. Community partners are other organizations. It's similar to what I said about the community advisory groups. It's community groups that reach other groups. So it may be a religious congregation, it may be the Howard Center, it may be the Association of Africans Living in Vermont. There are groups who can further publicize and further reach out to certain groups that we don't have to necessarily target individuals when we can use some of the networks that are already in place in the community in those community partners. And then checklist templates and other resources is some of the actual meat of the toolkit. Like, how do we make sure that we're doing this correctly for any given project? How do we know that we're following our best practices? How do we know what we might need to do for different scales or different contexts? So the engagement types are types of people who are reached in different ways. It's not necessarily specific groups of people. Like it might not be low income seniors, or it might not be, new Americans who are in high school. They're not as tight as that. It is more grouping people in how they like to be engaged with, how they like to be communicated with, and what they are motivated by in order to participate in public engagement. And the purpose of this slide is to show that if you really break it down, even in a community like South Burlington, you could end up with a huge number of engagement types that is completely unworkable for individual combinations of your life stage, which they identified as high school student, adults with kids, adults without kids, and seniors. Barriers to participation, which they had 4 categories: cultural, social, physical, accessibility, language, and resource. And there are a lot of sub barriers in that one. And then motivations. Again, they've listed 7 categories and 36 total motivations for why you would want to engage. What would actually get you to do the survey? What would get you motivated to come to a public meeting? So how they went through and cut out and it's more recombining all these things is, does your unique combination of those 3, life stage, barrier, and motivation, impact how you engage? If yes, you're an engagement type. If no, you're not necessarily an engagement type, but you may be something that someone we can reach through our community partners. It doesn't mean that if you are a specific combination of those 3 categories that we don't want to reach you. It's that your category may be reached by the same process as another category or as 100 other combinations. So it may be that there could be a huge number of people who the best way to communicate with them is email newsletter. And then there's a huge number of people who are most motivated by it impacting them and their children personally, and not, thinking about the future. There's different things that people care about and different ways that they are engaged with. Oh, I should mention, and I did write down that they've landed this is all still in progress with Civic Brand, but they landed the last time I knew, and last time I talked to them, as engagement types actually being adults with children and adults without children, because of the difference of being able to access them through educational institutions. Individuals with accessibility needs, high school students, low-income individuals and families, multicultural Americans, recent refugees, new Americans, ELL, and non-English speakers, gathered by some of their language and cultural barriers to participation, and seniors. So using the toolkit, how does this all work? You want to meet people where they are, overcome their barriers, and motivate them to engage. Feels fairly straightforward, but that's the idea. That's what we're trying to do, is reach people, remove the obstacles that they have to engagement, and motivate them. Like, why is this worth your time? Why is this worth your effort? What would get you to care and want to respond? So for any project, you would have these 4 stages. They did it as a 0 and then 1, 2, 3. Identifying the project impacts, or who the project impacts, and the desired level of engagement. And I'll talk about that on the next slide, the level of engagement. Start your engagement for a project, answer the specific question or solve a specific problem, and then close the loop and verify solutions. So the 2 things that are a little less robust in South Burlington now are 0 and 3. We do a pretty good job about starting engagement and doing public outreach and communicating through the channels that we have, through the website, through email, through the other paper, through networks of people that we know, through our committees. And we do a pretty good job of framing our outreach as we're answering a question, we are solving a problem, what are we trying to do here, what is the point? We do a bit less of a good job at the beginning as truly scoping who is this decision affecting, And so therefore, who do we need to make sure that we're hearing from the most? Not that we don't want to hear from as many people as we can, but who are we specifically wanting to hear from the most for any given project? And then 3 is what I said before. How do we close that loop? How do we make sure people feel valued and heard, and communicate that on the back end and not just stick with that stage 1 and 2? And this is what I meant by the engagement spectrum. This will vary pretty dramatically by project. From top to bottom, it's the least public input to the most public input. So there are some projects that are fairly operational, that really the public input or the public engagement is informing them. This is what's happening. We had to change this. We changed how the parking lot is striped, certain things that are really just information. Here you go, public. Here's what the city is doing. Then you move through the middle categories: consult, involve, and collaborate. And those are a bit of a sliding scale, depending on what kind of project you're talking about. Consult is, you're getting a little bit of feedback, but it's more of a check. Like, we're thinking of doing this. Is that a good idea? Involve is a little more than that. Maybe they're involved. Maybe the public is more involved in some of the decision making. There's more of being able to tweak things. There's more of providing feedback and incorporating public concerns a little earlier in any given outreach process. Collaborate is even more than that. It's sort of on that same sliding scale, but a higher level. And then shared decision making is giving all the way up to a formal role, like a public vote, of letting people truly make a co-decision with the decision-making body in the city. So part of the framework, part of the toolkit that's being developed is how does the city decide where any given project falls on this kind of top to bottom spectrum? And that allows the city to make decisions about funding and timeline. Clearly, the bottom of this table is going to take more time. You're going to give the public more time to digest. There's going to be more iterative process than the top. So just moving a little bit into some of the identified best practices. One is at the beginning, is that step 0, defining your goals. Clearly defining the project purpose, goals, and objectives. Identifying the engagement types and the communities most impacted by any decision process. And from the last slide, the required level of engagement from each type or community, and from the city at large. Because you may have something where the city at large needs to be informed or needs to be consulted, but there are certain groups of people, like maybe it's high school students who use the fields at the schools, or use the walk to school paths, or something that you want to be at the collaborate level. So you could have varying levels for different things. So this is in step 0. You really want to be clearly defining your project from the beginning. And I will say we are incorporating a little bit of this in the Planning Commission's work right now. We have started drafting something that we've tentatively called a project charge, where we start a discussion and we start something that we're working on, and the commission has identified to work on in their work plan, and is coming from the policies, priorities, and strategies from this year, and really outlining what is the goal, what are we trying to do, what are the questions we're trying to ask, what other committees are going to be involved, into a 1 to 2 page document that is then very available for members of the public. Even if they come to the process a little bit later, they know exactly what the scope of the topic that the Planning Commission is working on. So the next set of best practices is making engagement accessible. Providing multiple engagement channels. That is along the lines of what I was showing before about what we've even done for this project, which is things like individual interviews, focus groups, public surveys, public meetings, different ways to reach people through the different types of technology, through different social media, through the website, through the other paper, and trying to reach people where they are. Using culturally relevant and accessible communication, that again is with the same, making sure that things that need to be translated are translated, making things accessible to students or to families in the schools if that's necessary, really tailoring what we're doing to the people we're trying to reach. This is similar, but hosting engagement opportunities in accessible locations. So everything doesn't necessarily need to be at City Hall. If it's a decision that is about something on Shelburne Road, maybe the meeting should be over on Shelburne Road somewhere, for example. And offering flexible participation opportunities that, again, online, in person, written, over the phone, at a meeting with sticker dots, whatever it might be. And creating safe and inclusive spaces. I think that goes without saying in this kind of project, but it's something that we do want to be keeping in mind as we move forward with this kind of work. So how do we close the loop? This is where we get into that step 3 that we haven't necessarily done the best job in the past. And I don't think any community has really done. This is all a moving target, and this is something that can always be improved. So the step 3 part of this process is, who do we close the loop with? And how do we close the loop with them? So you may have, we would use our principles and guidelines and best practices, some of the things I just talked about, and our community partners to give project updates, general feedback. We post on the website if it's something for the city at large. But then if there are particular engagement types involved, verifying, validating, and getting specific feedback from those people and from those groups again. So maybe it's you have a follow-up meeting after the decision is made to talk through how this decision was made or what happened, or what the next steps are if they feel strongly about something that was or wasn't done. And making sure that those engagement types that were involved at the beginning are fully informed at the end. I meant to say, and then maybe this will go backwards for me. This is also an opportunity for the new data manager position to get involved in city decision making. It's an opportunity for, how did things go? How did the decision work out? And using some of the data that we can get on, it's hard to come up with an example because there's so many things and there's so much data in the city, but there's an opportunity for that to track the outcomes of any decision and incorporate that kind of data feedback in any communication we do with specific people. So here's some best practices for that feedback loop. So maintaining a constant presence and ongoing dialogue, building trust in long-term relationships, and that's really the point of this whole project, is if we go out once every 3 years and say, oh, hi, Islamic Society, we need your input on something, that's not building community trust. Especially if we say, hi, we need your input on something, and then we never close that feedback loop. So the intention of this whole project, but especially the stage 3, is really making sure people feel trusted and valued and part of the process. Again, leveraging existing community networks. That's part of what we were saying before about community advisory groups. Some projects may need a community advisory group like we set up for this project, and identifying the people that need to be in those groups and what networks they can access in the city is part of creating this feedback loop. And again, providing clear, concrete follow-up. And this is just back to this core slide. This is the core slide. If you read any slide in great detail, this is the one. Really, the intention of this is to use the guidance that's given to us by the city. As I said, this starts with the Planning Commission and the Planning Department, because that's where our grant funding is coming from. But the intention is to be building the structures and building the framework so that outreach in South Burlington is transparent and predictable. And transparent to me is you can't finish being transparent. There's always more that you can be done. There's always better communication. There's always this more targeted communication. To help you engage with people effectively, use your community partners, use the networks that already exist. We don't need to reinvent the wheel and try to, postcard mail to every household for every project that we're doing. We may be reaching the people we need to reach through really tailoring our outreach through this process. And finally, as I said before, valuing the feedback given to us by communicating those outcomes well. And the city council is really the core to this. If the council can take this toolkit, when this is still the concept, we don't have the final product, but using these kinds of principles and setting up this predictability from the council level will really improve, I think, our community members' opinions about how involved they can be and how involved they want to be with city government. And there's really no downside to more public participation. So that's my long speech. And I'm expecting questions, and I also talk fast, and I apologize for that. Tim's looking.
So just take me back a second. So there was a grant that paid for the introduction of this whole concept? Or how did that
No. So there is a grant program at the state level called the Municipal Planning Grant.
Yeah.
And what we applied for was to develop an equity and planning outreach toolkit.
Develop the toolkit.
Yeah. So I came into the city in November of 2021. And in the first couple of projects I was really working deeply on here, things felt very ad hoc. It's like, oh, I guess we'll put an ad in the other paper. Oh, I guess we should probably have a public meeting. Like, oh, I guess maybe we should do this. And some things worked and some things didn't work. We had meetings on the city plan, for example, where we offered childcare and nobody came to use the childcare. So in order to do things more effectively and efficiently, it felt like having a predictable structure was good both for the city to be able to economically allocate resources and really target where they needed to be, but also create a structure where, you know, maybe people anticipate childcare. So they see a public meeting is posted and they say, oh, it's a weeknight meeting or it's a Saturday morning meeting. Like, I bet they'll have childcare, or I bet they'll have a meal, or whatever it is. Like making things predictable so that people aren't dismissing public participation without even looking at the details.
So, as to directly answer your question, so the state gives out municipal planning grants. So this was funded through a municipal planning grant back in 2022. We first applied.
Yep.
And was seen as really innovative because it was really linking the concepts of equity and inclusion into the planning process.
Right. And so the RFP we put out was from our idea at the staff level to develop this kind of structural toolkit, and then getting a consultant to help us do that. And Civic Brand's focus is on municipal government communications, so they were a good fit for us to use.
Is there other technology that we don't have that would help us do some of this outreach today? I mean, that we're thinking about acquiring or?
I'm looking at Andy.
One thing that came up when we were, I think it was you and I were at a coffee with council.
Okay.
And there was a woman who was just very vocal about communication and about how the city needs to use different tools. And she was talking about social media and video clips and feeds that she's like, people don't look at the stuff that you're doing. They get their media or their information in different forms. And
yep.
I don't know what any of them are, so I'm not one to talk about it. But
yeah, like I'm not going to make Andy do TikTok, but you know, people get their news through TikTok.
I would love to see a TikTok video from you on a regular basis.
How about Andy?
No, you. That'd be fun. But so you guys are tackling a huge issue. I mean, we talked about 150 people respond to the budget. And now it's up to 200?
127.
127. You know, there's all this concern about the budget. 127 people respond.
Yeah.
But then they respond to the polls.
But and then they come back and say, "Well, we don't like what you did."
Right.
But or I think about the dog spa out on Heinsberg Road, who was upset that the LDRs changed without them knowing it, and. On the one hand, you can do as much of this as you possibly can, but that doesn't mean people are going to pay attention.
Yep.
And so how you It's
Well, that's why
you've taken on a big piece.
well, and that's why that third piece of the, this times this times this, or the list of 3 things that we want to do is how do you motivate people? What are people motivated by? Is it I'm motivated by my property tax bill from this year? Am I motivated by my grandchildren from, in 40 years? Am I motivated by the future environment? Am I motivated by the current economy? There's all, I think it said 43 different motivations that were identified, and I'm sure all of those have nuances. Like,
And as a business owner, just example,
mm-hmm.
they would have been motivated by the idea that I might not be able to use my land the way I want to
Mm-hmm.
because of changes, but that doesn't mean that they were paying attention to it.
Right.
And there's a really tough hook there. So
Yep.
I love that you're working on it.
I was wondering if you could share a little more on, and basically following up what Laura's saying is, who does this affect?
Mm-hmm.
You're saying, that was one of the tools you're saying is, wow, these are the landowners who will be affected, or this will be, whatever group. I guess, how do you define that? And then, what is the reach out message? Is that the targeted email? Is that whatever? And then just conceptually, the ultimate goal is to affect our decisions.
Yep.
So we're not making decisions based on the 3, 5, 10 people or the 127 people who respond to the budget.
Yep.
But in a broader group. How is that information brought back to us?
Yeah, so I think that'll vary a lot project by project, and the details of that is what our consultant is still sort of fleshing out. I think the identification of who is affected is a little twofold. I would say there's a geographic impact, like if it's something that's a specific, district, that's, a geographic impact of the landowners there. But something like a crosswalk, you might think, oh, well, it's just the people who live around there. Oh, but no, that crosswalk is the one that's used by kids to get to the school or by people who are walking from the bus stop to the grocery store. So really, that's why that step 0 exists, is to really have an intentional thinking through of who is impacted and how, and identifying what of the engagement types they fall into. So you might have people who, you identify groups of people, but they all fall into the same engagement type, who is motivated by being able to get to school or work safely, and they're now I've lost my train of thought. They're motivated by the same thing, and then they are also reached most easily through Instagram or through the other paper or whatever it is. So identifying small groups of people and then identifying where they fall in the engagement types that we've developed will help us direct how to communicate with people, how to gather feedback from those people, and how to get the people to the place or the place that they're giving the feedback. So some of those finer details is what the consultant is still working on for us now. We're hoping to have it by the end of the month, but it might be early November.
And then again, it would be about packaging it in. We're going to be talking about, I don't know, whatever the issue was before. Sorry. If we were to be talking about whatever the issue we were talking about before,
Mm-hmm.
you would say, this is in making whatever presentation on ordinances or whatever, you would
Yep.
say, we targeted this group, this particular group is affected, this is a response we get. So it would be part of the briefing on any sort of decision or new initiative that you're sharing with us.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah. And the idea too is that it's not necessarily majority rules. There may be situations where knowing that a person is affected by the location of a crosswalk when they're you could hear from one person that says, I can't safely get from the bus stop to the grocery store because of this crosswalk or lack of crosswalk. That's valuable. We don't need 40 people to say that for it to be valuable. So some of it is, how do we reach the people who will give us even the anecdotal evidence that shows who is affected in the community.
That's a good example, because I remember reading that email.
So I just want to make a connection here between council's work and planning and zoning.
Yep.
So what Kelsey's really describing are intentional engagement approaches for big planning efforts. You know, building a big piece of infrastructure, writing a big master plan, those kinds of things. I don't want the council to think that every decision recommendation we bring to you, we will have walked through this process for, because in many, many ways, you are our framework for big decisions that are citywide, like land deals, like big ordinance changes, like contract negotiations, you know, those kinds of things. So I don't want to set a misunderstanding with council that every decision point that comes to you is going to have gone through this framework. What Kelsey is really building out with her team is those things for large planning efforts. What Andy and we will do moving forward is how do we bring that toolkit citywide to other kinds of engagement efforts.
Yep. And understanding that if this is done really well for something like the city plan or an LDR amendment, those are the documents that you're looking to when you're making, you know, your policy priorities for a given fiscal year, or, you know, working through some decisions that you make at every meeting, that you're looking at it through the lens of the city plan document and the budget documents and all these other things that would have gone through more of this process. So the idea is that the big documents and the big planning things and, you know, big DPW projects would have some of this happen, would have this process happening, that then you feel more secure that that process occurred when the documents were developed. So if you're following the documents, you're following that.
Yeah, I looked at first of all, your presentation really gave life to this, because as I was going through it, it would sound a lot of mom and apple pie type stuff. So I appreciate you walking through. I do take it as sort of a call to action by council to also consider a similar elements of this process as we look at large decisions too. And I think the engagement types is a great way to describe, it's a way I wouldn't have thought about it, but it really articulates, you know, when we were interviewing for committee members, we often kind of defaulted to we'd like some age demographic representation, but there are definitely other elements that represent diversity and represent different viewpoints. So this engagement types is a really interesting way to look at it. And the other thing I've seen when I talk to community members, it's this notion of I didn't know I should have been interested in this topic or how it impacted me. So there is an element of pushing enough information out that encourages people to understand why they should be interested or why they would want to be. And that's a tough one.
Yeah, the motivation is a tough one. I think the reaching people where they are is going to be really critical. There are likely people who never interact with City Hall. They never come to the library, but they are interacting with the Howard Center. They are interacting with CHT. They are interacting with their religious community. Their people are interacting with different networks. And if it happens to be that their sort of day-to-day involvement in their community or their sets of communities, because nobody's represented by one community. So individuals could be in many communities, but maybe one of those communities isn't the library or isn't, you know, people who are involved in City Hall. And I think something that is important, part of accessibility, is also plain language communication. So I talked a little bit about translation, but there's translation in sort of policy language to plain language, like communicating what does this mean? Like who does this affect and how, and not just writing it at the level that we're used to writing it for our own internal documents.
Yeah, there are different colors here in this because not just your slide, but I mean this meeting, right, is a meeting in the public.
Yeah.
Right, it's not a meeting of the public, but
Correct.
you have, I mean, the Planning Commission has some important meetings that are really of the public, right? And communication is just like, it's the whole key, and then finding out how to trickle down that information to each individual subgroup, right? Because they all have their different ways of finding things out, right? And so I think Andy has his work cut out for him, and I want to see the South Burlington City app on my phone someday that gives me notifications, and I can select what types of notifications I want, right? What meetings are happening today, tomorrow, next week. Oh, the rec department's doing this. Oh, I can play basketball at middle school, So
Yeah.
that's just,
And
tomorrow. Can we have that tomorrow? Yeah.
That may be coming sooner than you think.
Okay.
Could be a feature of our new website where people can choose what they want to be notified about. So when certain
Okay.
pages change or get updates, they can
Nice.
receive those notifications.
Nice. We're catching up. We're catching up. Great. Thanks. Any other comments by council?
Sandy Dooley has her camera on.
Sandy Dooley has a comment. We're about to bring up. Oh.
Sandy Dooley turned her camera on. Sandy Dooley turned her camera on.
Okay, there I am. I just wanted to ask whether any of this dealt with change and how to help people better accept and understand change. The thing I think about is we're going to have, as I understand it, we're going to have a roundabout at the intersection of Swiss Street and Spear, which I think is great, but we don't have any in South Burlington. We don't have that many in Vermont. And I think, did you talk about, it would be great within maybe the first 2 or 3 months before that's going to be on, in operation, to have some communication about why this is the better choice, and maybe even just how to negotiate it, how it works, or even just, I think in Ireland, that's practically all they have for intersections. Just that some kind of context for people, that they're not just driving down Spear Street and all of a sudden there's this roundabout and they don't know how to use it.
Yeah, so Sandy, the intention would be that this kind of process would have occurred before any scoping or before that decision had been made, and that would have identified the people who, commuters who go through that intersection, or people who live in that area, or people who ride bikes, or whatever it might be. That identifies the specific communities that would be affected. They're informed and communicated with and invited to engage in the early decision process. And then the idea of closing the feedback loop is not just closing the feedback loop maybe when a decision is made, but continuing that communication moving forward. So you continue something like that has a longer construction timeline, where it's, a decision or early feedback and scoping is way back here, and then decision and design, or something like the bike ped bridge comes to mind that has a whole scale of things.
Sorry to interrupt you, Kelsey. So the example of this is the realignment of the lanes on Dorset Street on Williston Road at Dorset Street. So that years ago through Public Works, that we had a lot of conversations about that. We got into the budget to do that. Right as it was painted, we did a little video educating people on what was going to happen. It's that kind of closing the loop, I think, Sandy, is what you're suggesting.
Yep.
So yes,
Yeah.
that is part of this effort.
Because I agree. Follow through is always sort of the tough thing, especially if you're not overloaded with staff, because you're always trying to implement, but that follow through is the challenge.
And part of the structure is intentionally raising communication and development of our relationships with community partners to the level of some of these other big steps, because if we can keep strong relationships with community partners and not just reaching out and saying, hi, I need you to help with this one project. Okay, I'm not going to talk to you for 3 years. You're not building that strong network and that strong trust, because we can rely on a lot of Chittenden County and Vermont, even Vermont statewide networks, to do some of this outreach work for us. This working through the CCRPC is one thing. Working through nonprofits that are maybe based in Burlington but have a lot of clients in South Burlington. Making sure all of those relationships are really strong and really robust makes all public outreach that comes through down the road a lot simpler and easier.
Thank you.
For the record, there is a roundabout in South Village already. It's really small.
Thank you. I'll have to check it out.
All right. Any other comments? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we hope to see this toolkit in action and some future apps coming along. Can't wait. All right, moving on to item number 10, which is convene as Liquor Control Commission.
Can you stop sharing your screen?
Oh, sorry. This happened before.
You can keep going.
I can keep going. Okay. Could I have a motion to convene as a Liquor Control Commission?
Moved.
Seconded.
Second.
Aye.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, it's unanimous. Okay, we need a motion to approve applications for rotisserie, outside consumption permit, Stewart's Shop Corporation, second-class licenses, tobacco license, tobacco substitute endorsements, and Gonzo's Indoor Golf Club and Academy LLC, first and third-class restaurant and bar license.
Moved.
Seconded.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. It's unanimous. And now I need another motion to come out of liquor control.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Thank you very much. We have approved all those liquor control applications. Moving on to item number 11, which is other business. Is there any other business?
Yes. Okay.
Who goes first?
Go ahead, Andy. Yes, just to close out on the last week discussion on the F-35, the proposal that I had put out there, I spoke to the city, found out how the right way to go forward is for me to suggest that staff bring to us language and a process for placing the F-35 issue on the March ballot. Just I think we have different opinions. I think that was reflected in the resolution as we discussed it. I'm willing to acknowledge that my view is my view and my perceptions. I have a strong view on this, but I'm also willing to understand that there are other views out there. And I thought, that, as I said last city council member meeting, that the best way to do this, as I think Winooski and Burlington did, was just put it on the ballot. So just my suggestion, following up on last weekend's or last session's discussion of this issue.
Something else?
Yeah. I just want to return quickly to two things I mentioned during the council report. So, one, the Rick Market intersection. Would love to get from Jesse's staff a set of options for that intersection.
Sounds good.
Okay.
There's somebody that's looking at that now, right?
So you approved tonight an engineering study to look
Yeah.
at the re-engineering of the intersection. I
Yeah.
think what Andrew is specifically talking about are city versus school funded traffic monitors.
Or no traffic monitor, or across it, like whatever the solution there is. I think we did promise the school a solution while we work on this engineering, study. And maybe there is none, but I think we do.
So we've had many conversations about this. This is I would argue, a city operational thing. The school, my staff and the school staff talk about this regularly. Staffing and overseeing crossing guards is something in our community that has always been done on the school side. We have $30,000 in our budget to support them. Until they fill those positions, on-duty officers are there every day they are available. We will train anybody the school has hired and provide them technical assistance. I think the challenge here is that we are cycling back to conversations that are operational conversations, and unless you want to really direct me to do something different with, a public works team that's down a couple of CDL drivers and a police department that's down 10 police officers, I think staff is doing what we can. I think we're looking on engineering solutions. And the background here that I can't remember, I don't know if you all know, sorry, is that you back in August asked us to help the school hire. So we committed to drafting an RFP to put out on the street for consultants for security firms, non-public safety firms that could help with this, that would be employed by this, in my opinion, employed by the school. So we drafted that RFP, and talking to the superintendent, she informed me that because of a collective bargaining agreement, they are not allowed to contract that service. It has to be a hired staff. So we said, okay, we're okay, we're going to stop this effort. This is not going to be a useful effort. It's, we've spent a lot of staff time already drafting the RFP. So when you hire folks, let us know, and we're happy to step in. I think what Andrew is frustrated with that series of events, and would like us to come back with a different kind of staffing option. I think that we have a lot of other priorities going on right now. I think putting more air into this fire is not necessarily going to be helpful from the community perspective. I think the more staff can work together on helping the school to hire the professionals they need and looking at engineering solutions, which is the infrastructure the city is really responsible for, we will be more effective.
One other piece that I heard in that, Jesse, not from you, but from the communication that went around, is that the city offered to help the school, but the city is in a position to hire and manage that position if it were to be taken on. So it's not something that staff currently feels they have the capacity to even entertain. And that's an important piece in there as well.
That
Is
is
that
a
correct?
whole new book of business that we have never done that I would not recommend we take on from the school.
That's what I heard.
So it's back in the schools, the ball's back in their court, but they have a union clause where they can't hire,
They can't contract it out.
they can't, is there any, because of the job description?
So
Well, I don't-
traditionally this is the superintendent's work, but traditionally in some collective bargaining agreements, there are clauses where if you have a union employee that does work, that you can't contract it out to somebody else.
Is there a job description in a union contract for?
I don't know.
I don't know
the
either.
answer to that.
Yeah, they do have set descriptions. So they have traffic monitor, crossing guard, like they do have that.
And they're part of a collective bargaining agreement?
Mhm.
So but they can't hire anybody because they don't get anybody responding to their ads, right?
Because they're trying to hire someone that has kind of a higher level of responsibility and more training than your typical crossing guard for the intersection. They're not finding anyone to fill that role.
No, so no one, they can't find anybody to hire.
This also explains why they can't just get one of the local firms to bring in people to help them, because it has to be a staff member.
Right.
That's a whole new revelation.
Well,
Yeah. This
but
is
I
just going to
don't
go round and
yeah,
round.
I don't think this issue is going to go away, but I hear what you're saying. If it feels intractable to me, I don't know. Let's park that for now. The second thing I want to return to is I mentioned that VGS is actually very excited to help us with weatherization. They have funding, they have workforce. They would like some support. I don't think they need it, but they would like some support. While they do that, I know we're ramping up, we're hiring a director, and I would like us to provide them some minimal level of support to show them appreciation, really, for their efforts and to get that going while we have this, enthusiastic, willing partner. They've asked for a list of rental properties. And to meet with us, so I just want to put that out there. It's all carrot, no stick, because they basically do things for free.
Are folks looking for my response? So these are all emails Andrew and I have had.
Yes, they are.
So as Andrew says, we are hiring for a climate action manager. We had interviews today. That is the policy direction I feel like I have from you all, is to hire the professional who's going to implement the climate action plan and lead these efforts. I think this program, as Andrew's describing, is really exciting. I think that we have an obligation to the community to bring on the expert and the professional who's going to be leading these efforts over time to build the building and thermal implementation plan, to identify the kind of highest and best uses for our time and our energy and our education right now, to build those relationships with Vermont Gas, with Green Mountain Power, with Efficiency Vermont, and build those programs in partnership. I think starting a program right now with no staff capacity 6 weeks before, 2 months before we have somebody on board is extremely premature and doesn't allow this person to come in and lead. And I know Neil, I offered to be in touch with Neil and say, this is really exciting. Can I be in touch in 6 weeks and 2 months to introduce you to our new leader? And that is my proposal of how we move forward.
I think it makes,
And I don't see
makes
a,
a lot of
6 weeks
sense.
seems okay.
I don't see a problem with it. I mean, it would be good to get the person that we're going to hire, right?
Yeah, 6 weeks is okay.
To end up implementing that, whatever form that is, right? I mean, so if GMP has a program today, right, anybody can go apply for it, right, if they know about it?
Well, not GMP.
VGS.
VGS
Right.
and CVOEO.
So
yeah.
they must have their own outreach going on, right?
They haven't had a lot of success in South Burlington.
I've never heard of the program, so I haven't seen any ads. I haven't,
They need the toolkit that
there you
Kelsey's
go.
put together.
There you go. So
6 weeks is okay.
Pending start dates.
Okay.
is that it? Does anybody else have anything before I had a woman contact me about cannabis retail. Even though the state has stopped issuing licenses, she and her partner were interested in the possibility of maybe having a retail establishment in South Burlington, which means we have to have a discussion about putting something on the ballot, right? Because is it a charter change or is it a state?
So right now, how the state law is written is that municipality by a vote of the community has to opt in to
Opt-in.
retail
Okay.
sales.
Okay. So it's just an opt-in by vote to that. Okay. But then, if the city, if the voters okay it, does that mean we can negate that vote as by our own vote, or is that a definite opt-in
no.
complete?
The voters opt in.
Okay, the voters opt in. All right, but we have to.
Then we would have to set up a cannabis control board and
Right.
our own
Oh, we do.
processes and.
Oh, all that. It's not
Yeah,
a state.
we'd
it's a s-
regulate it locally.
Oh, you do. Oh, okay.
I mean, the state also regulates
Right,
it.
right, but there's
it's
also-
a duplicative local
Right,
process.
This
So-
isn't even
Yeah,
in
see
the
if-
bike rack.
Yeah,
Just
I'm
saying.
I just was. I,
Not on the bike rack.
Well done using the process, Steve.
Yeah.
It's not anywhere.
it's not anywhere. Yeah. So I mean, I didn't promise anything. I just said these are kind of the steps it has to go through, and we're not talking about it.
But can I
Next
clarify
year's
a question?
retreat.
Since licenses are not, those are paused, isn't it a moot point anyway? I mean, there's a
That's
lot.
my
that we
Yeah.
have to-
Well, I mean, they're paused, but they might be unpaused at some point. So if somebody wanted to start a business, they got to get the vote, on a ballot at some point. So
Tim, are you proposing that this get put in the bike rack?
I'm not proposing anything. I was just relating this conversation that I had. Right? And we had another gentleman that was interested in this, was
In the
trying to get a
past, yes.
petition
Yeah.
about it, right? So yeah. Anyway,
That was a while ago.
so I don't want to take any action on it right now.
Good.
Agree. All right. So much for other business.
On, just to close out on the F-35 there, do we have support to get information from the city on how that would look on the ballot and the process?
Well, Mike, I appreciate your attention to that, but the resolution was already passed, and so that ship has kind of sailed at this point, and it would
So
just.
this issue is closed then, or?
I mean, you probably saw the feedback on Channel 3's report where they interviewed Bernie and Senator Welsh, right, and Congress woman Ballot, and there were differing opinions, right, on what they were, sympathetic to. So, I mean, the three cities passed the resolution, right? Where it goes from here is up to the congressional delegation. You're right. 2 other cities did have the vote, but I think it's worth our time having the vote. That's my personal opinion as a city councilor.
In
I
terms
agree
of
with that. I agree with that.
having this conversation, I don't know what the ballot initiative looks like. Mike, if you wanted to put together your concept of what you think a ballot initiative should say and share it, if it's something that I agree with, I'm not opposed to putting it on the ballot and would consider supporting it, but I can't do that without knowing what it is. So if you come up with a draft of what you would like to have the city vote on, I will read it, and if it makes sense to me, I will support you with it, and then you got the 2 votes to get it on the agenda.
I think that's what Mike just said is can he engage
The staff
Colin or
to-
Jared in
to write
support
what
of
would be
language?
a fair statement on the F-35 issue, and what would the process be involved, and come back and provide
Well,
us with
you
that
could
at
go
the
get
next-
the Winooski resolution and the Burlington ballot items and see how hard it is to reconcile them to be South Burlington too, right?
Can I just ask the city?
I didn't see this on our policy agenda.
What?
I didn't see this on our
I
policy.
didn't see the
agenda.
resolution in our policy agenda either.
Just to get back to what you were
But,
saying,
so the
Mike,
idea is to close the issue on this. But
before-
if you guys don't want to, I'm not going to. We all have our views, and the resolution. I think that what this congressional answer was, I think we all knew, and that was one of my concerns about the resolution. Was raising hopes, but I do understand you have all expressed strong views. I have no problem having the city express its own views. But if you guys think it's not necessary,
before spending city time, staff time on something, I would want to know what that something looks like. So if you came, we put together a resolution. It was a decision then to have that go to staff to codify it for us. If you come up with a proposal, I would be thrilled to look at that proposal and consider supporting you on it. But that way, I don't want to spend city time until I know what it's being spent on.
And the other thing is that, go ahead.
Sorry, can I just clarify?
Yeah.
I think you guys may be just talking past each other. I think the ballot language that Mike's looking for is, which is what the Winooski and South Burlington were more or less is, or Winooski and Burlington were more or less was, does the community want to see a different mission than the F-35s? I think that's the.
I think the Winooski language. Do you support the F-35 mission? If you're, that was the language, and in Burlington it was a two-stage question. Do you support the F-35 mission, and would you want to change an F-35 mission?
So
I don't think it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
That he's.
And then the process, it would be in terms of again staff time change. What's involved in that?
But does it say, do you support the National Guard?
Without
it, I mean, so there's so many ways it can be worded.
Well, this is why I thought I would ask the city to come back to us and say what is a clear question on this issue. And if you look at the Winooski one, I'm pretty sure it was, do you support the F-35 mission?
see, the other side of the coin is that we look at the resolution. It passed 3-2. The ship has sailed, right? And to be honest, I had some serious doubts about and reservations about bringing the resolution up for on our agenda anyway, right? Because we went through all that in 2018. We went through some very disturbing meetings back in 2016, right? This one was very easy. I mean, it was that big deal. But my point is that I'd rather not have to bring it back up again at all.
And stir that.
And I also don't want to bring it up during a critical budget vote, right? Because this could be a very difficult year for budgets for both the school and the city, right?
So then the issues behind us, and we just move forward. Because I
think
didn't
we're-
expect this to come up. In fact, what I was surprised is when this first came up, there was a discussion not to bring it forward, and then it sort of popped up, and we went forward with it. So I'm just trying to be, trying to saying if the goal is to try to flush out an understanding, or is the goal to?
I think that we're done.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my understanding. I don't know if anybody else feels the same way.
Well, I would just clarify that one of the gaps that existed I do think it's unrealistic to think the issue may not come up again, but one of the gaps that exists is South Burlington has never taken a vote to the community. So that gap will continue to exist.
All right, ready for some executive session?
I move that the city council enter into executive session for the purpose of discussing the negotiation or securing of real estate purchase or lease options relating to future city green, inviting Jesse Baker, Steve Locke, Alana Blanchard, and Colin McNeil into executive session.
No, Colin.
No, Colin.
Yep, sorry. I know it's written there, but.
Okay.
And can you do, well,
And the second one as well? Should we do one at a time or no?
yeah, do them both at the same time.
Do both at a time. The second motion, I move that the city council enter executive session for the purpose of discussing the evaluation of a public officer or employee, specifically the city manager and city councilors, including their respective roles, responsibilities, and appropriate delineations.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Do the invitee lists change for the second item?
Yes, just me and Steve for the second one.
Inviting Jesse Baker and Steve Locke into the second session.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And we will not be returning after the executive session. Are we going to go somewhere? Or are we going to stay here?
No, we can stay here.
We're going to stay here. Okay. Thank you.